Princess Evenus von Albion of the Empire was so gorgeous, any guy could fall for her. Her sapphire blue eyes and rose-tinted lips made her look like an angel. She always completed her look with a flowing dress and a beautiful hairstyle. Today was the day she was ready to face high society again. Evenus was in Albion, the empire from the novel, Flower of Tragedy. The second she walked into the hall, one stone-faced dude locked eyes on her. She gave him a sweet smile, keeping her poise and elegance intact. Little did anyone know, her soul was trapped inside this character from a novel. She kept walking, not understanding why everyone was making such a fuss. Evans glanced at them and realized they were absolutely terrified. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of person the old Evans was. The princess was ruthless, heartless, and always stirring up trouble in the empire's high society. She even threw a major fit right in front of the emperor about her upcoming wedding. She didn't get permission for it, but she still started hitting on the maids. On top of that, she constantly accused other women of flirting with her man. Her actions led to her sweetheart dumping her, after which she trashed the entire room. All of these events were fun to read about, but now they felt like a ticking time bomb. It's been a whole 2 weeks since she woke up in this body. The first day was a total freakout when she opened her eyes and sat up. She couldn't figure out what had happened to her, or what was up with her hair. This girl was dead certain she'd kicked the bucket not too long ago. That night, she was daydreaming while crossing the street, and bam, got nailed by a truck. Just thinking about how she died made her head pound like crazy. She went white as a ghost when the maid started calling her Your Grace. The maid looked surprised and said she was a noble daughter of the emperor. The girl was secretly stoked because she already knew that from the novel. Now she knew exactly where she stood and what she needed to do. She awkwardly walked up to the guy and said she'd been wanting to meet him for ages. She tried to play it cool and be a little sweeter, and it actually worked. He asked if he could have the honor of sharing her first dance. Princess Ivness blushed and happily accepted his proposal. After that, they walked onto the dance floor, holding hands in front of everyone. The musicians noticed them and tensed up, choosing the music for their dance. In the next moment, Princess Evenus closed her eyes, completely content. Terence Lentz was the Grand Duke of the Albion Empire, and also Ina's hopeless crush. Initially, he only agreed to the engagement because of her, let's just say, persuasion, and a whole lot of pressure. Considering everything she'd done, it was clear he couldn't stand her. He told her to chill out for a second and not look like she was walking the plank. Inez tried to joke and said she might drop dead if she stepped on his foot. The Grand Duke's sudden laughter really got on her nerves. He smirked, saying they both needed each other. Evenus saw right through his BS and knew he could ice her at any second. He acted all polite in public, but she knew what he was really like. Terence Lentz was a secret mastermind pulling strings and making people disappear left and right. He was playing the loving partner next to someone he couldn't stand. Right now, he was just messing with her, like a business partner, because he found her useful. The predator in his eyes made it clear Evenus was just a disposable asset. She felt the danger, realizing how risky this forced partnership was. She had no choice but to accept the rules and play the part of the happy couple. She was stuck in the middle of the story, and Saint Sorel still hadn't shown up. Unlike that girl, Princess Ivness was universally despised, like, really hated. She was in deep trouble, because there was pretty much no salvaging her reputation at this point. Even so, she was ready to pull out all the stops to avoid kicking the bucket in some tragic way. According to the novel, Princess Ivness is supposed to get offed on her wedding day. The day she woke up back in her body, the girl realized she had just over a month until the wedding. In her past life, she was an orphan who was constantly scrapping just to survive. She tried to improve herself every single day, but some freak accident cut her life short. She was pissed that after a life that rough, she ended up in the body of a totally useless princess. Evans stared into Terrence's eyes, silently promising herself that she'd survive, no matter what. For the first couple of weeks, the girl tried everything she could to clear her name. She was just sitting there, cool as a cucumber, surrounded by these ladies giving her the stink eye. Even's stepmother straight up asked her why she even bothered showing up to this tea party. The girl slowly put down her cup, like she was remembering that she'd been told to stay away. But then Evenus just smiled, real calm, and said that she was the one who invited her. She was supposed to be this noble lady, but her wild streak was just getting worse and worse. She was so out of control that all the servants were scared stiff of her. But now she seemed like a totally different person, all gentle and kind. The maid remembered the night the girl woke up and said she couldn't remember anything. She wanted to call a doctor, but Evenus stopped her, like she understood everything. The maid was freaked out at first, but the girl really did become way more chill and polite. Evans smiled and asked if she'd packed those tea leaves. The maid Nell confirmed and quickly handed her the box. She gave her stepmother the leaves brought from the north, saying it was a thank you for the invitation. The woman reluctantly accepted the gift, commenting on the pleasant aroma. Her friends watched this unusual scene with bewilderment. One of them remarked that the princess's presence made the gathering even more radiant. She wished Princess Sorel could join them, but she was on the front lines. Everyone was worried about the war, the outcome of which was uncertain. The women fondly remembered Sorel, hoping she would return safe and sound. Sorel was the novel's main character, praised by everyone for her abilities. People pushed Eve to the side, thinking she was worse than the healer Sorel. The girl knew the women were trying to get under her skin. Eve's stepmother saw her as a thorn in her side, messing with her plans. The princess wasn't about to play her game, and smiled, bringing up the war. She declared with a flourish that the Albion Empire would be victorious. The lady asked her if there was any reason she was so sure of that. She'd heard that the enemy nation, Rascon, had put their youngest prince in command. They were betting he wouldn't get the support he needed from back home. The ladies were stunned by how much she knew about the enemy's movements. Even her stepmother had to admit she made a good point. She brought up how her fiancé still hadn't bothered to visit his bride. Evenus immediately knew they were trying to make her look pathetic in her future husband's eyes. She turned to Duchess Rohan, Terrence's aunt, asking her to talk to the Duke. The princess was stunned that they were now acting like they felt sorry for her. She smiled and said there are plenty of couples who grow closer after getting hitched. On top of that, she pointed out that the Duke despises mistresses. She subtly reminded her stepmother that she used to be a mistress, and added that she'd be happy. Ive's stepmother should have kept that shame buried. Considering she went from concubine to empress, Eve started thinking about having to move to the duchy after the wedding. Realizing her stepmother was deliberately keeping tabs on her, she decided to state her request. She asked if she could visit the temple and pray for Sorel's return. On top of that, she wanted to offer a prayer for the late empress. She decided to play the dutiful daughter, so they wouldn't have a choice but to let her go. After a short pause, the woman finally complimented her kind heart. She gave her consent and figured the emperor would be pleased. Princess Ivness agreed and thanked her for the okay. Having gotten what she wanted, the girl bowed and decided to leave. No sooner had she left than they started talking about how much she'd grown up. The stepmother guessed she'd heard the Grand Duke would be at the temple for the Enshi festival. She concluded that Ive just wanted to chase after some guy. That woman was convinced she was going to get publicly humiliated no matter what. After that little chat, Princess Ivness headed straight for the temple. She was lost in thought, gazing at the scenery, thinking about the upcoming Enshi festival. Duke Terrence never usually came near the imperial palace, but he showed up at the festival every year. She deliberately asked to go to the temple just to catch a glimpse of that guy. Right now, he was the only one who could help Ive get out of this mess. With those thoughts swirling in her head, she stepped into the temple to perform the ritual. There wasn't anything super special or complicated about it, but it still had its quirks. Usually, you'd leave jade prayer beads on the altar as a sign of respect to the deity. On top of that, you had to say a quick prayer. She was trying to focus on her requests, but a servant's sneeze distracted her. She immediately apologized, startled, and asked if she was okay. Before, Eve was always a total germaphobe, wearing gloves everywhere. She was so messed up in the head that she wouldn't even leave the house without them. The servant was surprised that she was casually walking around outside without gloves. She stopped wearing gloves because she realized they were blocking her power. In the original story, she barely used her ability and figured she'd lost it. Originally, Eve just didn't know what triggered it to activate. Using the ability required direct contact, hence the bare hands. A priest greeted her and awkwardly started talking about some old guy. He mentioned a huge crowd showed up today, all hoping to get her blessing. The girl greeted the high priest with a smile. She noticed his guarded reaction and figured he'd been through the ringer before. After that, the girl turned to the servants and ordered them to bring out the chest. The high priest was taken aback when he saw this massive chest. The princess pointed to the pile of jewels and said she was here to present them to the temple. The guy walked up to her, confused, and asked if this was for real. The girl stopped him, saying she had one small condition. Putting on her sweetest face, she said she wanted to ask him for a favor. In the end, the girl finally got the go-ahead after a little bit of persuading. Turns out, the girl needed a bouquet made from the sacred tree's flowers. At first, she was kinda embarrassed to say that's exactly what she needed. The high priest was clearly taken aback, since picking those flowers was forbidden. Princess Eve decided to crank up the pressure a bit and put on a real show of disappointment. They'd heard about her explosive temper and started sweating bullets that she might tear the temple down. After a whole lot of back and forth, they finally caved and agreed to give her the flowers. The high priest was shaking with rage, but he couldn't bring himself to refuse her. In the end, the princess's infamous reputation finally came in handy. Now all she had to do was pick out one bouquet and put it back where it belonged. The girl stepped forward and was shocked to see a familiar shape on the men. She'd spotted her hanging around the Grand Duke's knights before. Princess Eve picked up the pace, stoked that they'd run into each other like this. The next thing she knew, the Grand Duke himself had noticed her. She froze, mentally confirming that, yeah, he really was the most gorgeous guy ever. He was like 20 times hotter than she'd imagined. He saw she was flustered and coldly suggested they cut to the chase. Evans felt awkward, but she had no choice but to make contact. She smiled and said she'd prepared a flower from the sacred tree as a gift. The girl carefully tucked a small letter among the blue petals. She asked him if he was willing to accept her present. Eve said she didn't have some hidden agenda. She just wanted to apologize. She knew it was late, but she still admitted she acted like a total idiot. The girl shut her mouth real quick when he cut her off with that deep voice of his. He asked if she was trying to apologize for, like, chucking a glass sculpture at the guy standing next to him. He also brought up that one time she went totally ballistic on his assistant. The Grand Duke turned away and told her to keep the flowers. He added that he accepted her apology and they'd see each other at the wedding. The girl couldn't just let him walk away, so she yelled for him to stop. The guy gave her a nasty look when she said it was the princess's orders. He made it clear he was unimpressed and asked if she was sure about that. Evans knew exactly what was happening, but she couldn't just let it slide. She called him out, saying he was breaking protocol by leaving before a lady. His glare intensified when he realized she was trying to lecture him. He basically told her she had no business talking about proper behavior. Evans apologized again, saying she was left with no other choice. He froze, silent, when she asked him to spare her a little more time. She couldn't help but wonder if he'd even noticed the change in her. Eventually, he agreed to talk, just to figure out why she was being so persistent. He looked at her, waiting for her to respond. She decided to seize the moment and said the flowers weren't just an apology. Evans remembered that the late Archduchess's death anniversary was in 2 weeks. She immediately brought up the fact that she was her godmother. The girl also decided to mention what connected them before her passing. She recalled that the woman was always kind to her and said she loved these flowers. The Duke was surprised that she was so aware of her tastes. She asked again to accept the bouquet and requested they be placed on the grave in her stead. The Duke paused briefly, weighing his feelings and thoughts. Princess Evenus held her breath after he decided to give her his answer. He reached out and said he was willing to accept them, since she insisted so much. The girl sincerely thanked him for agreeing and handed over the flowers. She asked him to keep them close and take good care of them. The man was silent, then finally took the blessed bouquet from her. After that, he left, giving her a meaningful look. Princess Evenus squeezed her eyes shut, mentally begging him to find the note. The girl saw a maid and suggested they return to the palace. All the way to the carriage, she hoped she'd stay alive, and the Archduke wouldn't be blamed for murder. She got ready to climb into the carriage, but stopped at the last second. Princess Evenus turned around in surprise when she heard a familiar voice. The Duke's aunt smiled, happy that she hadn't left yet. Eve remembered that this was Duchess Rohan, who was at the tea party. The woman also noticed the princess wasn't wearing gloves. She claimed she took them off so she wouldn't damage the flower. Rohan was surprised they even let her pick the sacred flower. The princess mentioned she'd donated some of her jewels to the temple. That's why they allowed her to take a few flowers from the tree. She explained she planned to place them on the Archduchess's grave. Rohan was struck by the kind heart of this unusual Princess Evenus. She thanked her, saying her sister would have been truly happy. Originally, the Rohan duchy wasn't a major player in the story. The Duchess showed up with the Archduke now and then, but the rest of the family barely got a mention. Eve didn't have any close female friends, so Rohan's daughter, Diana, got stuck with bridesmaid duty. Diana was secretly crushing on Eve's brother and was stoked to be part of the wedding. But in the story, Diana's health took a nosedive, and she couldn't make it to the ceremony. Eve had heard before that she'd been sickly since she was a kid. She figured Diana might be able to lend a hand somehow if she got better. Even though she had her doubts, she decided to check in and see how Diana was doing. Rohan smiled and said that Diana was on the mend. She mentioned Diana was super busy getting ready for the wedding, and that her health hadn't taken a turn for the worse. Eve was just thinking about passing along some medicine when Rohan held out a handkerchief. The princess looked at the plain white cloth, totally surprised. Rohan smiled and said he possessed a special kind of warming magic. Evenus was stunned by the woman's kindness, especially after she'd been so arrogant before. She could hardly believe this sweet lady was the Duke's aunt. She sincerely thanked her for the gift and took the handkerchief. The instant she felt the fabric, a pleasant sensation washed over her. To her surprise, she found her consciousness shifting somewhere else. The next thing she knew, she was in a room she'd never seen before. It took her a few seconds to get her bearings. She turned around and overheard a maid talking about medicine. Evenus glanced at the girl, sensing some seriously bad vibes coming from her. She saw her sneakily slip some powder into Diana's medicine. Ivans tensed up immediately, trying to figure out what the heck she mixed in. As soon as Diana chugged the medicine, blood came pouring from her mouth. After that, all the maids rushed in and it was total chaos. Princess Ivnus felt like she'd just seen a vision of the future. She looked at the girl in the bed and realized it was Diana. The girl tried to call out for her mom, but her body gave one last shudder. On the way home, Princess Iv just kept replaying what she'd seen in her head. She stared blankly at the carriage, like she was trying to catch her breath. Eve glanced at her reflection and got lost in her memories again. She remembered all those feelings after touching the shawl. As soon as she came to, she saw the garden around her again. Rohan noticed her confusion and decided to find out what happened. Princess Ivnis was having a hard time telling her about her daughter's passing. Right now, she was the only one who had witnessed that scene. She realized her unique ability to see the future had finally kicked in. Ive remembered the vision and was once again sure she'd seen Diana. She figured the powder was some kind of substance meant to mess with Diana's health. If it wasn't for that, the girl could have been a bridesmaid, like they originally planned. The place from the vision definitely looked like the Duke's mansion, since everyone was dressed to the nines. She figured whatever was going on with him had something to do with the upcoming mansion ball. Eve decided to ask one question before she left the mansion. She asked if the Duke was planning a ball at the estate. The girl mentioned she'd heard something about it from another noble lady. Rohan remembered and said it was scheduled for Diana's birthday. The princess was happy to hear this and quickly gave the idea her blessing. They'd planned the ball for the annual family celebration and couldn't postpone it. A lot of people weren't thrilled about holding a ball, while both the Duke and the Emperor were at war. Even though they were away, they were still okay with the ball going forward. After a short silence, Eve asked for an invitation to the party. Rohan immediately started stressing about the Duke's reaction if they ran into each other. Evans thanked her and promised she'd keep a low profile. In the carriage, the maid suddenly mentioned they'd be living at the estate soon. She held out a coat and told her she should put it on. Princess Ivans agreed, then asked how sick Lady Diana really was. She suffered from chronic illnesses and also a rash all over her body. That's why she always wore dresses with a high collar to cover it up. Princess Iv was shocked at how harsh she was being about Diana. She glanced at the sky and realized another precious day had slipped away. The girl felt like she was stuck in some kind of crazy survival game. She knew she could kick the bucket if she didn't figure out a way to survive. Against all odds, she managed to shove those flowers into the Duke's hands. From here on out, it all hinges on how much he believes her story. She figured she'd get another shot at meeting the Duke tonight. Evans wasn't sure it would work, but she kept hoping for the best anyway. The whole time, she was mentally crossing her fingers that everything would go smoothly. Finally, she told the maids to head back to their rooms and get some rest. They were thrown for a loop because they could see she really had changed. That very night, the Duke showed up at the spot where they were supposed to meet. He stared thoughtfully at the floor, waiting for the girl to arrive. A second later, he heard soft footsteps coming from behind him. Princess Ivnis was visibly happy when she saw he'd come. The Duke turned around and coldly stated he'd been standing there for ages. The girl was surprised he was calling her out for being 2 minutes late. She decided to get down to business and said she came to tell him something important. He said he was expecting something like this after reading the note. It said a sword was hidden in the statue's scabbard in the West Garden. He didn't expect her to know anything about the lost sacred relic. Originally, that sword belonged to the Archduke's family, but it was stolen and vanished. She knew where it was, because she'd read about it in the original story. Terrence wanted to know how she knew about that kind of intel. He was thrown when she mocked him by repeating his question back at him. At first, she figured he'd be interested in finding the rest of the sword pieces. She hinted that she knew exactly where they were located. She was using that as leverage to get him to agree to help her out. The princess explained that she'd be offed on her wedding day, and then he'd be framed for it. That statement immediately rubbed the Duke the wrong way. He already thought she was bad news, but now he just figured she was spouting nonsense. The princess was ready for that reaction, and insisted she wasn't lying. She'd seen a future where the Emperor would take her out using some divine power. The Duke had heard she'd lost her gift when she was just a kid. She claimed that power came back to her after they got engaged. The girl straight up lied, saying she saw a future with some holy relic in it. His questions just confirmed what she already knew. He doesn't trust her. She was being honest, saying he wouldn't help her unless she proved she was useful. Ivnis was convinced he'd let her bite the dust if he didn't know about her gift. Then, he'd clear his name by taking out both his wife and the Emperor. That's exactly why she had to prove her worth to him. She promised she'd definitely help him out with her special ability. He asked if she had any proof to back up her story. She said he'd noticed the first signs in about 5 days. He demanded to know what he'd be wearing to their upcoming wedding. The girl closed her eyes and instantly saw a vision of him trying on a new suit. He turned down the butler's suggestion and asked him to prepare something else. Terrence decided he'd wear the ceremonial color court robe. He didn't take his eyes off her, thinking about what he'd been thinking about that morning. The guy figured she'd dodge the question, but she actually mentioned the robe. He was surprised at first, but decided it was probably just a coincidence. She hesitated when he asked her to tell him what would happen to him tonight. Nothing in the original story mentioned anything about tonight. He smugly judged her untamed power when she said she couldn't answer. She had no choice but to resort to a drastic measure. She agreed to try and asked him to hold out his hands. The second she said that, disgust flashed across his face. Eventually, she managed to convince him to extend his hands. The princess focused intensely, silently praying that it would work. A few seconds later, she felt like she was underwater again. She snapped her eyes open, like she was diving into another world. The girl was suddenly surprised to find them sitting at a table, playing cards. She mentally cheered that she had actually pulled it off. She knew she had to get back ASAP with some serious proof. But the second she focused on one of the guys, she was totally taken aback. Next thing she knew, she was snapping back to reality. The dude noticed her face change and asked what she saw. The girl spilled the beans, saying she saw him holding 2 sevens of different suits. The guy closed his eyes, like he was finally buying what she was selling. He dropped his hand and said that was all he needed to hear. The Duke pointed out he's shipping out to war soon and doesn't have time for card games. The princess tried to talk him out of it, saying he couldn't know for sure. She practically begged him to believe what she said and just meet her halfway. So he finally caved and promised, said he'd get it done by tomorrow morning. She thanked him for giving in and said she had to get going. No sooner did he spot the door ajar than he grabbed her arm. The princess was instantly taken aback and let out a little yelp. The guy pulled her close, real tight, like he was shielding her from something. She wanted to know what the hell was going on, but he told her to shut it. Princess Evnis did as she was told, and then she heard footsteps. The next thing she knew, the main dude, Michael Sheldon, walked right into the room. He's the second in command of the Albion Empire's Royal Knights. The princess had no clue why he was there. The second she accidentally stepped on the Duke's boot, this loud thump echoed. He had no clue they were hiding in the alcove and demanded they come out now. Princess Ivnis freaked, totally lost on what she should do next. Surprisingly, the Duke just asked her to close her eyes for a sec. She was even more shocked when she saw him pull out a sword. Annoyed, she told him to put the sword away, which caught Michael's attention. She noticed he was staring right at them and gave a kinda awkward wave. Michael immediately grilled her about why she was here so late and who this guy was. The princess gave her partner an uneasy look, struggling to answer. The guy was clearly ticked off, but he sheathed his sword anyway. He said Michael should start with an apology for interrupting a private meeting. He gave Sir Sheldon a death glare and pulled Ivnis closer to him. The guy immediately turned red and apologized for something he didn't even know about. Eve wasn't expecting that, but she decided to play along. She asked him to keep it a secret and promised to keep the secret of the third brick in return. Michael was stunned that she knew about such details. It was in the center of the left stone wall, where Michael and Sorel secretly exchanged letters. They usually exchanged important information and talked about everyday life in the palace. It was their secret, but she had to show her trump card to keep him quiet. She implied he could be in a world of trouble if the truth came out. He clenched his trembling fist and swore on his honor to keep what he'd seen a secret. The girl thanked him and said the Duke would escort her. After that, he hurried off, leaving them alone in the dark. Terence was impressed that she'd found out about such an important person's weakness. The princess clarified that today's situation shouldn't become public knowledge. Terence immediately guessed she was afraid he might cause problems for Michael. He said he just meant to knock him out, that's all. Princess Ivins was shocked that he was actually Michael's half-brother. As everyone knew, Michael was born from a fling between a maid and the former Archduke. Ultimately, his mother was abandoned by his father and kept the secret of who he was. The original novel mentioned that Duke Terence was aware of this fact. He was biased against Mikhail, even though the guy was innocent. Princess Ivnis insisted that they each go their separate ways. The Duke said he understood and quickly took his leave. Ivans said goodbye back and hoped they'd see each other soon. That same night, the Grand Duke returned to his estate. He quickly took off his outer coat and went into the main hall. Terence was still mulling over the prediction the princess had made. He couldn't help but remember that she definitely didn't seem like she was trying to pull a fast one on him. He decided to launch an investigation through the Emperor's side to verify her claims. He stepped forward and saw his brother was in the middle of a card game. His brother said he'd been waiting for him so they could play together. The Duke laid into Kamion for playing cards with a war brewing. The kid's face dropped when he realized they didn't want him to play. He insisted again that they play at least one hand. Terence sat down at the table, remembering the cards Eve had called out. It seemed like he was curious to see if her predictions would actually come true. The kid grinned and confessed he was making a gift for the princess for their wedding. Terence mulled those words over in his head and picked up his cards. It suddenly hit him that he still hadn't thrown out the flowers she'd given him. Terence knew he was useless, but he still didn't want to throw himself away. His brother suddenly asked if the princess would like his gift. The man ruffled his hair and said that she definitely would. Meanwhile, their gaming buddy was stoked about the new outcome of the game. Terence suggested they call it a night and get some sleep since the game was over. The knight bowed, and then Terence thanked him for his service. After that, the man was completely alone with the cards in his hands. He stared thoughtfully at the two cards, as if trying to confirm the prediction. He looked at the 2 sevens, predicted by the girl, and said it was just a coincidence. Since then, 5 days of hard work had passed. On one of those days, Terence was staring out the window of his office, lost in thought. He glanced towards the door when he heard a familiar voice behind him. The knight said he'd looked into the solar eclipse, but everyone's saying there isn't one coming up anytime soon. Besides that, he said they hadn't found anything fishy during the investigation. The emperor offered a payout for agreeing to the marriage and the return of the Lens family lands. If it weren't for that condition, Terrence probably wouldn't have agreed to this marriage. He was getting worried about what the princess said, about this whole marriage being a setup by the emperor. He used to brush it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. But now he's starting to have doubts. He knew he'd have to believe it if the eclipse actually happened. The knight noticed where the duke was looking and glanced out the window too. He was completely stunned by what he was seeing in the sky. A solar eclipse was happening right before their eyes, and nobody saw it coming. Kamion swore that both the academy and the main temple confirmed it wasn't supposed to happen. The duke clenched his fist, realizing the princess's words were all true. He ordered the horses to be prepared immediately and strode forward. Terrence stated with complete seriousness that he was going to the main temple. Meanwhile, the princess watched the eclipse, knowing all she could do was wait. There were 35 days until the wedding, before which she would receive a message. She sighed so heavily the whole time, like she was completely exhausted. She told the maid to stop embroidering and go get some rest, and on top of that, she kindly pressed a cookie into her palm. The maid was thrown for a loop when the girl squeezed her hand and froze. She snapped right out of it and just said her hands were really soft. The girl thanked the princess for the compliment and headed back to her room. So Ivnis found out she wasn't getting those visions as often. The second maid walked in and said the high priest sent her an invite. The princess gave her a surprised look, like she couldn't believe what she heard. That same day, she decided to hit up the temple and find out what was going on. The guy greeted her right away with a smile and thanked her for coming. He thanked her again for that generous donation she made. He confessed he wanted to talk about how the money from the jewelry sale was being used. The high priest offered to take her to a specially prepared location. The princess agreed to follow him, but told Nell to wait for her. She was visibly surprised when she saw exactly where he was taking her. Duke Terrence himself was standing there, which could only mean one thing. Looks like he deliberately asked the priest to send the invitation. That made sense to her, since the high priest wouldn't have invited her for no reason. Still, she decided to find out the Duke's reason for contacting her as quickly as possible. He was having a hard time believing in her abilities, but recent events left him no choice. He asked if anything she said last night had been a lie. The girl stood her ground, said she hadn't lied to him about anything. He realized he'd dodged a bullet, narrowly escaping a disaster the emperor cooked up. The guy was floored that the emperor would stoop to such dirty tactics. He pitched her a win-win. They scratch each other's backs. The princess wanted to know exactly what he was getting at. He reassured her he'd keep her safe, which definitely made her happy. She clutched her hands to her chest, beaming, and thanked him from the bottom of her heart. Her reaction made him wonder how long she'd been like this. He never would have imagined seeing her so expressive. He decided to cut to the chase and suggested they make sure the wedding goes off without a hitch. On top of everything else, he insisted she move into the Duke's mansion. She smiled and promised to file for divorce the second his safety was guaranteed. The guy definitely wasn't expecting her to bring up divorce so fast. Her statement caught him so off guard, he actually had to ask her to repeat it. She confessed that she'd rather live alone in some quiet little place. The princess promised that even after the divorce, she could still help him with her abilities. He remembered how just a couple days ago, she was screaming that she'd die if they didn't get married. Ivanus was floored by how petty and sarcastic her fiancé was being. She said sadly that she regretted what she did, and that she'd gotten over her feelings for him. Looks like he totally didn't expect her to drop that bomb so easily and quickly. She said she really was in love, but she had other reasons for going through with the marriage. Initially, she wanted to help bring peace between him and her family, but that turned out to be a pipe dream. She wanted people to see her as a go-between who'd been abandoned by her own father. The Duke praised her idea and said her wish could have come true if it wasn't for the Emperor. He asked if she seriously wanted a divorce when the time came. As soon as he heard her say yes, his face fell. He asked if she had any more intel about the plot surrounding their wedding. She was surprised and replied that all she knew was that she'd die on their wedding day. Besides that, Ivnis explained she can only see a short snippet. She remembered the original storyline and wondered if there were assassination attempts on other days too. After a short pause, she dropped the bomb that the Emperor would probably keep trying to off her before the wedding. She said she was so freaked out, she totally blanked on it. The Duke was kinda stuck, not knowing what the heck to do next. Out of the blue, he suggested they fake being in love and stick together like glue. He doubled down, saying it was the best way, and she could see the future with him. Looks like Princess Ivnis wasn't exactly thrilled with that plan. On top of that, he added it would make it easier to throw suspicion off him for bumping her off. Princess Ivnis agreed with his idea, but something was bugging her. The main snag was, the dude couldn't act to save his life. Back in the original timeline, he also pretended to be head over heels for Sorel. Even the novel made it clear the dude was totally clueless about love. She knew it'd be a hard sell to believe he'd fallen for Eve, the girl he hated. She tried to point out that this could actually make people more suspicious. He noticed she'd already apologized to him a bunch and started playing nice in public. He figured people might actually get why he was into her. The Duke insisted they still wouldn't think he was faking it. He reminded her that, given everything that's happened lately, there's no reason for him to pretend he's got the hots for her. The princess knew people would start wondering what he stood to gain from all this. Besides, this way she actually gets to stay at his estate and unlock her foresight ability. Ultimately, she decided to go along with his crazy scheme. He asked if she could get the Duchess's permission to attend the ball with him. The princess told him not to sweat it, and reminded him there was one way. She agreed to go there together and announced her new request. On the way back, she spent a long time thinking about the upcoming ball. Only after getting home did she realize how exhausted she was from the whole day. She was glad to be done with the tricky stuff and finally able to chill. Nell greeted her and announced that the crown prince had returned to the capital. The princess was not thrilled at the thought of her troublesome brother's return. He couldn't even bother to visit his sister and locked himself in his study. She took his anger in stride, considering all the things she'd done in the past. Even though they were on bad terms, she still wanted to see him face to face. She gave a polite knock on his office door and went inside. Princess Ivness found her brother, who didn't even bother to look up. The girl was struck by how much they resembled each other. She said she was glad he was back safe and sound. The guy immediately decided to skip the small talk and get down to business. She flashed a smile and said she wanted a wedding present from him. That childish request caught him so off guard, he even put down his pen. She hinted that she wanted to go to the Duchess's ball and needed his permission. He sighed, clearly exhausted, and asked if the Duke would be there. She admitted he'd be there, but swore she wasn't going for him. The girl flashed another dazzling smile and said she wanted to see Lady Diana. She explained that Diana had agreed to be a bridesmaid, even though she was sick. Evans declared she wanted to express her gratitude for that. Besides, she said the Duchess personally invited her and would be bummed if she didn't show. She batted her eyes all innocent-like and hinted that it was because of the Empress. The girl quickly explained that the Empress had asked the Duke to be nicer to her. Her brother looked genuinely surprised that she'd say something like that. He suggested she just ask the Empress for permission directly, instead of asking him. She figured he wouldn't let her go if he found out certain things. He facepalmed when he heard she'd actually told the stepmother how much the Duke hates mistresses. The guy figured she must be pretty messed up about what went down. He realized the Crown Prince probably hated Eve even more than he did. He asked her exactly what kind of training she'd had, preparing to become Duchess. The guy decided to quiz her about the borders of the different territories. She immediately answered his question, showing she knew her stuff. He was taken aback by her answer, even though it was pretty basic knowledge. He clearly had no idea she spent all her free time buried in books in the library. Her brother remembered her donation to the temple and said she was growing up. After a short chat, he finally agreed to pass on the message that she'd be at the ball instead of him. The girl was stoked. She finally nailed what she was after. She was about to bail out of the office, but he stopped her before she could leave. He told her she could hit him up any time if she needed anything. The princess was clearly surprised, since even in the novel, he never gave a damn about his sister. After that, she booked it straight back to her room, where she found Nell waiting. The maid greeted her with a smile and said she'd drawn a bath. Before chilling out, Evenus decided to check out the new maid. She introduced herself as Chloe and said she was starting today. The princess instantly remembered that the Duke had sent this maid to her. He'd mentioned it during their chat on the temple balcony. He said he'd send a maid ahead of her arrival at the palace. The guy was certain this would keep the princess safe until her wedding day. Turns out, she wasn't just a maid, she was also a bodyguard. A few days later, she was getting ready to hit the ball. On the way to the palace, all she did was stress about the party coming up. She couldn't stand the thought of messing up her dance at the ball. Nell was backing her up, reminding her of all the practice they'd put in. The girl thanked her for the support and all the help she gave. She glanced at the box, knowing she couldn't just sit on the sidelines during the dancing. Besides that, she was worried about how Diana was doing. She was trying to protect Diana, hoping to cash in later. After a while, she finally rolled up to the Duke's mansion. They exchanged pleasantries and thanked each other for the meeting. Diana Rohan showed up too, just to say hi to the princess. Ivnus was all smiles, happy to meet the girl. She also heard that Diana was doing better after getting some rest. Ivnus decided to give her a gift for being her bridesmaid. Diana thanked her and admitted she was dying to show her the dress she picked for the big day. Diana's mom offered to give the princess a tour of the palace. After that, they headed into the palace, where Diana showed her everything. Ivnus had been keeping a close eye on every maid that walked by. She was hoping to spot the one she saw in her vision. The princess even thought about asking them to gather all the maids together. She was desperately trying to figure out how to identify the maid and stop her. She snapped out of her thoughts when Diana led her into the music room. The princess was surprised to see such a lavish musical instrument. She couldn't help but wonder if there was even a room like this in her palace. Diana sat down at the piano and mentioned that the crown prince had been here before. Apparently, he came to meet her father and paused for a moment when he heard the music. Diana blushed and confessed that she still can't forget that day. Ivnis was shocked to realize she actually had feelings for the crown prince. She instantly remembered how the crown prince couldn't even remember her name. The girl mentally cursed him for not giving Diana a second thought. She didn't get what was so great about her brother, who wasn't exactly Prince Charming material. They left the room, and then Diana asked if the crown prince remembered her. Ivnis decided to lie, so she wouldn't hurt the young girl's feelings. Right then, they were getting close to Diana's room. Ivnis immediately thought about how she could track down whoever snuck into the room. On top of that, she decided to find out exactly what time she takes her medicine. She said she didn't want her to forget because of having guests around. So, Ivnis found out she's been taking medication before bed. Diana nodded, looking at the box with a thoughtful expression. She confessed she was bummed about missing the ball. Before, Diana couldn't go because of this rash she had. You could see it under her dress. The princess decided to change the subject and asked about the dress. Diana suggested they head to her room and check out the dress she had ready. She was happy to hear the compliments about her room. The princess smiled, looking at the dress she'd prepared. She was pretty surprised when she saw this plain dress. The girl immediately figured the duchess probably suggested she pick it. The bridesmaid shouldn't outshine the bride. But this was way over the top. She suggested adding some embellishments and lace to it. Ivnis told her not to worry about her and to pick out whatever she liked. No sooner did they start talking about jewelry than the princess suggested opening a gift box. Diana was stunned by the sight of the beautiful, delicate necklace. She was genuinely grateful for such a valuable gift. The princess just smiled, secretly agonizing over how much she wanted to go to the ball. She saw the sadness in Diana's face and couldn't let that stand. Ivnis decided to take action and suggested they head downstairs. Diana smiled and said there were a lot of things down there she wanted to show her. Ivnis just happened to overhear some aristocrats chatting about the weather. She glanced at those folks, wondering how they even knew the duchess. The girl looked around to see what her friend thought of all this. The whole group immediately started gushing about how beautifully the duchess had decorated the hall. They were all high and mighty, saying there's no way Diana could even make it. They were acting all concerned, but you could tell they were subtly making fun of her. She felt the unfairness of it all, and knew she couldn't just let it slide. She deliberately raised her voice, pointing out that the guests had already arrived. Those people immediately rushed off to greet Her Highness, the princess. She gave a venomous little smirk when one woman said she hadn't seen her since tea time. Ivnis said she didn't remember her at all, since her last name was at the end of the registry. She totally burned that smug lady by saying they didn't know each other. The heraldic registry contained the genealogy of all the noble families on the continent. By pointing that out, she showed them they'd pay the price for any slip-up. The guy scrambled to make amends, saying they were related to the Rohan family. The princess said they seemed like they were from the wrong side of the tracks, criticizing their boss in the hallway like that. That remark hit them so hard, they were completely speechless. She ordered them to watch their mouths. Her sly smile sealed the deal when she said she was going to relax here. They turned down her offer to join her and decided to stay downstairs. Ivnis turned to Lady Diana and suggested she get some rest. She asked her to keep everything that just happened a secret from her mother. Diana sincerely thanked her for trying to defend her honor. Ivnis was satisfied that she'd put them in their place and decided to get back to her own business. Meanwhile, the Duke was in his carriage, surrounded by knights. They were discussing signs of a major uprising in the southern region. Turns out, those reports were overblown, and there was no actual rebellion. The aide didn't understand why the emperor would go to such lengths. He asked Carmion who people would suspect if something bad happened to the princess. The knight immediately got worried and asked if he was planning to hurt the princess. He saw where the Duke was going with this and knew he'd be the fall guy. Carmion wanted to know why he was suddenly asking about it. He dodged the question and asked if there was any news from the princess. It's been a full 5 days since they met, and they still haven't connected. He wondered again if she was playing him when she said she didn't love him anymore. He'd considered divorce himself before, but he never expected to hear it from her. He couldn't figure out why her saying that got under his skin so much. Carmion pressed him, wanting to know why he brought so many knights to the ball. The man gazed off into the distance, lost in thought, and said he was asked to do a favor. He decided to keep quiet about exactly what kind of favor Ivnis asked of him. Right then, the girl was getting ready to meet the Duke. But first, she decided to prep for the main part of her scheme. She needed Nell to swipe the music room key from the Duchess while everyone was in the ballroom. The princess asked her to use it to unlock the doors and wait for him inside. She gave the maid a serious look and asked if she could pull it off. Nell was taken aback by the risky plan, but she couldn't say no. Before getting started, she decided to run through the plan one more time. She was supposed to head to the music room after the third dance wrapped up. After that, she'd tail the maid who was going into Diana's room. And then, she'd have to bust in there ASAP. Despite her confidence, the maid was pretty bummed out by her plans. She kinda nervously mentioned that the reception room was ready. The princess didn't seem to immediately get which room she was talking about. After a beat, everyone there got ready to greet the princess. That jogged her memory about the tradition of guests hanging out in the reception hall. They apologized for not giving her the proper welcome. The princess smiled and said the Archduke had insisted she come. All the ladies were shocked he'd even ask something like that. Just like she figured, everyone couldn't help but think she'd lost it. Meanwhile, Terence was just arriving at the Duke's estate. His aunt rushed over to greet him and let him know the princess had arrived. He saw her worry and told her not to sweat it, saying everything would be cool. The woman patted him on the shoulder and said she was really glad to hear that. She glanced toward the house and mentioned the third dance was about to start. The woman told him he should head over there and grace everyone with his presence. On the way to the banquet hall, he ran into a guy he knew. He immediately started talking about how his preparations for the business trip were going. You could tell from what he was saying that he was also dodging the whole marriage thing. Terence figured it had something to do with how he acted around the princess. He scanned the room, trying to find Ivness before the dance kicked off. He spun around the second he heard everyone start buzzing about the princess. The girl was standing right in the middle of the crowded hall, like some beautiful flower. She looked at the guy and smiled sweetly, like she was already playing her part. Terence was surprised by the gentle way she was looking at him. He went straight over to her, ready to strike up a casual conversation. The ladies around them immediately started gossiping about them, actually talking in public for the first time. She smiled and asked if that was all he wanted to say to her. Surprisingly, he just looked at her silently and tenderly, like he'd already gotten into character. In the next moment, he decided to do something he never thought he'd do. The man got down on one knee and asked if she would do him the honor of dancing with him. The crowd's jaws just dropped when they saw them touch. After that, they were instantly the main topic of everyone's gossip. I think even the band was thrown off by that sudden twist. Terence and Ivness were looking at each other like they actually had feelings. He made a mental note that she looked thinner than she had a few days ago. She'd mentioned before that she loved to dance, but right now she didn't seem to be enjoying it. He kept analyzing her and realized she looked sad. The next second he recoiled, surprised that he was even thinking about it. He tried to reassure himself that he was just worried about it messing with her abilities. Terence was so lost in thought that he squeezed her hand until it hurt. The princess figured she'd point out that so far, their plan was working out great. She smiled, saying she felt a real weight off her shoulders. That feeling vanished the second she caught his intense stare. The guy was so damn handsome, it took her breath away. She finally managed to exhale, and mentioned the dance went pretty smooth. She turned her head and realized everyone was staring in a different direction. Ivness tried to figure out what was going on, and was totally caught off guard. She definitely wasn't expecting her icy brother to show up at the banquet. He'd said before he was too swamped with work and wouldn't be able to make it. The Archduke's aunt immediately rushed over to greet the crown prince. She apologized that they weren't expecting him and couldn't give him a proper welcome. He thought it was wrong to let his sister go to the ball alone, so he decided to come too. The Archduke approached the man and hurried to greet him. Ivness's brother said it was a pleasant sight to see them getting along so well. Terence decided to reinforce that belief and gently put his arm around Ivness's shoulders. He said they were already engaged, so their closeness was perfectly natural. This move stunned everyone, including the crown prince. Ivness looked at the Archduke in surprise, trying to figure out what was going on with him. The novel said he was a terrible actor, but he was totally exceeding expectations right now. He asked for permission to take the princess away for a little while. The guy said he wanted to talk about the wedding plans and show off his estate. He put it so nicely, I basically had no choice but to say yes. Auntie Rohan was all, "Oh, it just warms my heart to see you two getting along so well." Terence gave the princess's hand a gentle squeeze, admitting he'd been a real jerk to her before. He said he felt awful for misjudging someone so amazing and kind. Every word he said made Inez blush like crazy, like they were actually head over heels. He noticed she was flustered and asked if she was okay. Terence pointed out she was sweating a lot and suggested she chill out in the drawing room. She took him up on it, saying she hadn't danced in ages. The crown prince was so thrown off, he didn't even try to stop them. Terence pulled her aside to a secluded spot, saying that should be enough for today. The girl agreed, saying they definitely made the right impression. After that, she turned and looked at the man, like she was trying to figure him out. She couldn't understand how someone could change so quickly. Terence seemed to sense her gaze and turned around. He immediately asked why she was staring at him like that. Ivness quickly asked if he'd brought enough knights with him. The girl felt relieved, knowing how the war had affected them. That's exactly why she specifically asked him to bring knights along. She admitted she still hadn't been able to identify the maid. The princess figured she was laying low, waiting for the right time to strike. They agreed to wait until she slipped something into Lady Diana's water. She named the time Diana takes her medicine and suggested we wait here. The princess was shocked when she saw him heading straight for her. He decided to just ask her straight up if the crown prince knew she was in danger. She said he had no clue and asked why he was asking. He couldn't figure out why she'd ask him for help instead of the crown prince's brother. She couldn't exactly say that Terrence was the one who won in the original story. Terrence admitted he didn't even trust the prince to protect her. The princess knew herself that he didn't have the strength or the will to keep her safe. The original story said the crown prince didn't mourn his sister's death. She sighed, realizing she couldn't even catch a break with her family in this life. Back in her other world, her whole family bit the dust when she was just a kid. She bounced around relatives for ages before they finally dumped her in an orphanage. The girl shivered, wondering what it was like to have a family that actually cared. She was so lost in thought, she didn't even notice Terrence standing there. He casually mentioned her outfit wasn't exactly weather appropriate. The princess smiled, saying she suddenly felt warmer, and thanked him. To her surprise, he asked her to call him Terrence, not Your Grace. He saw her look of shock and said it would be weird if they were too formal with each other. Ivnis agreed with his guess and said his name. She looked at his handsome face and noticed he was lost in thought. Looks like even he wasn't quite sure what to make of his mixed feelings. She immediately perked up, hearing footsteps in the distance. She glanced at Terrence, like she was checking if he'd heard them too. They ducked into the doorway, watching the maid walk into the room. The princess heard that she had brought medicine and understood that the moment had arrived. She immediately burst into Diana's room and told her not to drink that stuff. Ivnis made it just as Diana was about to take a sip. Guess she definitely wasn't expecting to see the princess so late. She spotted her hanging out with her brother and wanted to know what the hell was going on. Ivnis pointed a finger at the maid and straight up accused her of spiking something. The woman immediately started protesting, saying it was a horrible accusation. The princess was pissed that she was trying to play dumb. Just then, the summoned knights stormed into the room. The girl demanded they check the maid's sleeves. They looked at the duke, like they were waiting for him to give the go-ahead. The guy just calmly told them to do as they were ordered. They immediately grabbed the maid, basically immobilizing her. The knight pulled the incriminating vial out of her sleeve and showed it to the duke. The guy snatched it up and popped the top, looking all thoughtful. He was totally floored when he caught a whiff of something super familiar. He demanded they drag his aunt over there, pronto, and tell her Diana's been attacked. The princess rushed up to the duke, asking what kind of medicine it was. He clutched the vial to his chest, like he wasn't even sure he believed what he was about to say. Finally, he said it was just a fever reducer, nothing to worry about. The princess asked again, surprised, like she couldn't believe it. It was made from common herbs, all right, but they were seriously messing with Diana's health. Turns out, they were trying to make her sickness even worse that way. They picked a seriously messed up way to do it, slowly destroying the girl's body. Terrence's aunt rushed over to her daughter, asking if she was okay. The woman immediately turned to her nephew, wanting to know what the heck had happened. He explained that the maid had slipped some fever reducer into Diana's medicine. The woman was floored, since that kind of stuff was strictly forbidden on their estate. She glared at the maid and demanded to know who ordered her to do it. The maid opened her mouth in fright, struggling to get a single word out. She collapsed to her knees, saying Baron Marcel threatened to, well, let's just say he threatened her life if she didn't do it. The princess immediately tried to recall who this Baron Marcel was. Diana sadly replied that he was a relative they'd seen that evening. Ivnis was shocked that that smiling guy would pull something like that. The girl's mom straight up said he'd inherit the duchy if Diana kicked the bucket. Sounds like he heard Diana was getting better and wanted to make things way worse. Madame Rohan ordered the maid locked in the cellar and the Baron held in the prayer room. The maid begged for mercy, but she was in for a world of hurt. The Archduke's aunt thanked the princess for her help during this whole mess. Terrence decided to find out if she was checking all the food Diana ate. She said they always checked everything for poison and never found anything suspicious. The Duke told her not to blame herself and warned her he'd be right back. He showed his aunt a crystal from Arcania, found in the Martel mines way up north. He gave it to her so they could detect if there were any unpleasant additives in the food or drink. The guy said to consider it a thank you for the invite to the ball. The woman turned to her daughter and told her to thank him. To their surprise, Diana burst into tears, saying she ruined their celebration. Her mother immediately tried to calm her down, saying it wasn't her fault. The princess couldn't help but wonder if Diana's illness could ever be completely cured. She decided to try using her ability to figure it out. Ivnis gently touched Diana's shoulder and asked her not to cry. She mentally kicked herself for having such a useless power. The moment she got angry, she felt the image in her eyes start to darken. The next instant, she snapped her eyes open and could finally see the picture. She found Madame Rohan sitting there in full ceremonial garb. She was grieving hard, like she'd lost someone close. The woman was cursing the unfairness of it all, especially now that they finally had a cure. The princess tried to make sense of it, thinking they'd saved Diana Her assumption clashed hard with the gloomy vibe in the room. A guy sat across from her, telling her it wasn't her fault. He sadly concluded that nobody could have predicted her passing. The princess was stunned, refusing to believe Diana was really gone. She just stood there wide-eyed, not knowing what to do next. The girl silently watched this sorrowful scene from the future unfold. She tried to hold on to the hope that things could still be fixed. Ivnis was silently begging the woman to name the cure. The princess was only now noticing the Duchess's dress. It looked way lighter than the outfits she's wearing now. That could only mean the prophecy represents summertime. That wasn't enough info, since it wasn't clear how long it would take. She was racking her brain, trying to catch any details about the medicine. Talk about a letdown when she realized the vision was fading. The next second, she was back in her familiar reality. Diana asked anxiously if she was okay after suddenly spacing out like that. She immediately started freaking out that she'd been acting suspicious. The princess told Diana not to blame herself for everything that happened. She couldn't accept that this girl was really gonna die right in front of her. The vision really did point to there being a cure out there somewhere. She asked Diana if she'd ever like to visit her palace sometime. The girl started to have doubts, since she hadn't even been formally presented to society yet. The princess said she understood, but tried to give her a little confidence. She added that no one would ask questions, since she was helping them with the wedding. Diana's mom happily watched how kind the princess was being. She tried her best to support Diana, and asked her to help pick out a dress. They had no clue she was hoping for another vision. The princess wanted to use every trick in the book to find a cure. She finally managed to get the girl to agree. They said their goodbyes, seeing as it was getting pretty late. The princess left Diana's room and let out a tired sigh. The Archduke sincerely thanked her for saving his cousin. The princess was surprised and replied that she was just doing her duty as royalty. He praised her abilities again, saying he was pleasantly surprised. She knew he'd never give her a compliment without some angle. The door cracked open, and a woman appeared before them. Ivnis found Duchess Rohan looking pretty worried. She bowed her head and said she was truly grateful for everything today. On top of that, she admitted she'd totally misjudged her this whole time. The Archduke cut in, saying he'd prefer to keep their involvement under wraps. He figured their helping out could put the duchy in a sticky situation. The Duchess agreed to his terms and promised they'd keep it all quiet. She mentioned she'd swing by later to properly thank him. The guy said he'd stay put, and she should head back to the palace first. Before saying goodbye, he hoped their paths would cross again. Even though she didn't really have a choice, she still wanted to keep seeing him. After that, Ivnis returned to the carriage. Feeling like she'd done her duty, she paused when her brother asked if she was heading back to the palace. The girl calmly replied that it was late, and she needed to get home. To her surprise, he reached out his hand and offered to go home together. It felt so out of character that she thought she was losing it. She wanted to refuse, because she knew he'd want to grill her about Terence. Luckily for her, a servant from the Duke's household appeared behind him. He informed the Crown Prince that the Duchess wished to speak with him. The man calmly agreed and said he'd be there shortly. He realized he wouldn't be able to leave with his sister and said they'd talk later. The princess figured the Duchess wanted to talk about punishing the Baron. In this country, you needed the Emperor's okay to punish a noble. With him out of the picture for a bit, Arrington was the only one who could give the go-ahead. The princess spent the next morning chilling in her favorite bed. The maids greeted her with smiles when they saw she was awake. They immediately offered her a robe and suggested starting the morning with a warm bath. They seemed way more polite now than when she was throwing a fit. Ivnis turned around and noticed something weird. She spotted one of her maids looking seriously on edge. All the maids clenched their fists when she said she wanted to ask something. The maid asked if it was true she'd been with the Duke last night. The princess smiled and said they were spot on. The maid blushed and asked if it was true he'd confessed his feelings for her. Ivnis understood their interest, but never thought it'd go this far. They froze in front of her, like three hungry puppies waiting for the juicy details. They were waiting for confirmation of the wild rumors about him pouring his heart out and apologizing for everything. Before she could answer, she heard that the Empress wanted to see her. The princess was visibly surprised that her stepmother wanted to see her. She quickly got ready and headed to the room where the Empress was waiting. The woman gave her stepdaughter a stern greeting and asked if she enjoyed the ball. The girl stepped closer and said she was totally into it. The stepmother put down her cup and said she'd already heard about what went down. She asked if it was true she practically begged the Duke to be her date to the ball. The princess was shocked and demanded to know who told her that. She insisted that he was the one who publicly asked her to dance last night. It seemed so unbelievable to her that she just couldn't wrap her head around it. Seeing her reaction, the princess said there's nothing weird about dancing with your fiancé. The Empress took a sip of tea and recalled they'd bumped into each other at the temple recently. The princess explained she wasn't trying anything, she just handed him a bouquet. The woman smirked and guessed he only accepted them because she dropped his mother's name. She was racking her brain trying to figure out why he was being so nice. The Empress asked if she'd considered maybe just staying inside the palace. She added that her probation period wasn't exactly over yet. The woman grimaced and said nobody knew how much more trouble she'd cause the Duke. The princess frowned, finally getting what she was driving at. Her stepmother was afraid the emperor would be ticked off at her for not keeping her daughter inside. Even so, Evenus wasn't backing down and decided to see this thing through. The woman insisted again that she'd already been out and about. She suggested the Duke would probably prefer it if she just stayed put. So she was basically trying to talk her into staying, not trying to defy the prince. Evenus mused that she now agreed with what she'd said. To her surprise, the girl smiled and announced she'd like to live in a convent. She said the emperor would be pleased if she prayed until the wedding. Evenus pointed out that her great-aunt and both former princesses had lived in a convent. The moment she mentioned it, a look of worry crossed the empress's face. Her great-aunt was locked away in a convent, and her mother was executed as a criminal. It was believed that princesses living in a convent were purifying themselves. The empress asked what she imagined life in a convent would be like. Evenus said she wouldn't mind living a quiet and humble life until she got married. The girl deliberately brought up what people would think, knowing she went there on the empress's advice. The woman knew she was walking into a buzzsaw. Evenus knew this would look like she was being held prisoner or something. In the end, the stepmother said they should sleep on it. The princess saw her chance and asked to meet with the Duke tomorrow. The empress was furious, realizing she was being played. Evenus was stoked by her quick thinking and prepped her next move. She knew her stepmother was cornered and acted like she was clueless. The woman got so ticked off, she practically jumped out of her skin. A maid interrupted, announcing a wedding gift had arrived for the princess. She was totally thrown that the Duke even sent anything at all. Looks like the princess wasn't expecting a gift this early either. On top of that, he asked if she could get permission to leave the palace. The princess perked up, realizing her little leverage play was going to work. Evenus went straight to her stepmother and asked if she could go see her fiancé. The empress gritted her teeth, trying to keep her cool. She finally caved and said she could go see the Duke. The princess thanked her happily, thinking she'd won this round. She said her goodbyes, already figuring her stepmom would rat her out to her dad. The girl doubted anything major would happen in just one day. As soon as she stepped outside the palace, a servant girl rushed up to her. Catching her breath, she told Evenus to follow her. She kept urging the princess on, trying to get them upstairs as fast as possible. After that, she led the girl to the window and told her to take a look down. The princess still didn't get what was going on, but she looked down anyway. To her surprise, the entire garden was covered in flowers. Turns out, these flowers were a gift from the Duke, sent all the way from his estate. His gift was in line with Albion's wedding traditions. There were so many flowers, it was almost too much. The second maid smiled gently and said they were all Rostan flowers. In the Empire, those bright flowers were supposed to symbolize love. The princess immediately realized this flower probably only exists in this world. Nell started wondering where to store all these flowers so they wouldn't freeze. Evenus suggested decorating the palace with them and making a nice potpourri. On top of that, she suggested brewing them into tea. The Duke sent not just flowers, but a ton of jewelry too. The princess immediately started worrying about whether she could actually accept them. She doubted he might ask for them back after the divorce. In the end, she accepted the gift anyway and gave instructions for what to do with it. After that, the maids got to work following her orders. Every single thing the Duke sent looked super luxurious and expensive. She was going through the boxes, thinking about how much all this stuff cost. Evenus thoughtfully opened one after another, until she stumbled upon something interesting. In her hands was a necklace with a stone that looked like some holy relic from history. In the original story, Sorel accidentally found it on the battlefield and learned it sealed away a legendary beast. The moment she reached for the crystal, she woke up the sacred beast. And that's how this whole thing caused a worldwide, situation. She immediately remembered that the relic from the original story wasn't this small. Evenus kept staring at the crystal, lost in thought, trying to figure things out. She asked Nell to call for the knight who delivered the gifts. In that very moment, the man arrived and greeted her, kneeling on one knee. Evenus mentioned she was curious where the Duke got that necklace. The guy admitted it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. The princess froze, totally shocked he'd trust her with it. She told herself she'd be a duchess soon and could give it back after, Evenus decided to ask about the jewel's special properties. The guy couldn't answer, said he'd never heard anything about that. The princess figured it might just be a regular rock then. The knight noticed she was flustered and asked what was wrong. The princess smiled and told him to pass on her thanks to the Duke. She closed the box, deciding to wait for Sorel to show up. A few days later, Nell the maid was walking thoughtfully down the hallway. She was originally going to bring oils to Evenus's bedroom, but she was stopped. They decided to chill in the living room together and talk about the recent changes. The maids all agreed that they were starting to like the princess. They figured it was because of her upcoming marriage to the Duke. Nell listened to their guesses, knowing the real reason was something else entirely. They didn't know that after the hunger strike, She lost her memory and even forgot who she was. Since then, she stopped causing trouble, smiled, and even went around without gloves. It worried her at first, but now everyone was starting to love the princess. Nell got up and said it was time for her to meet Her Majesty. She said goodbye to the other maids and thanked them for the cookies. The second she left the room, she saw a maid carrying a basket. Lana gave her coworker a thoughtful look. To Nell's surprise, she just walked on by without saying a word. She subtly tripped the girl, sending her sprawling onto the floor. Nell was horrified to see the perfume oil spill everywhere. Lana coldly told her she should be more careful, since the oil was valuable. Nell tried to figure things out, saying she deliberately tripped her. The girl smirked and told her to prove it. She said she didn't understand how the princess could keep someone like her around. Lana said she could handle her duties better, and just walked off. What she didn't know was that Ivnis was watching the whole thing. Lana thought she was getting away with what happened, scot-free. Nell definitely wasn't expecting to see Her Highness the Princess. She hurried over to her handmaiden to see if she was all right. She turned to Chloe and asked if she saw Lana trip her. The princess confronted Lana, asking what excuse she was going to come up with. The girl panicked and threw herself on the floor, begging for forgiveness. The princess sighed, exhausted, and said she needed to apologize to the victim. Lana broke down crying, begging for forgiveness, saying it was her jealousy talking. Nell felt a pang of sympathy and told her not to do that kind of thing ever again. The princess looked at the maid and knew that her vision had been right on the money. She'd accidentally touched Nell and seen her fall and shatter a bottle of oil. Ivnis made sure she was okay and decided to go find the head maid. She told the maid to explain what happened and ask for punishment. Ivnis figured they'd just dock her pay or give her some crummy job. She told Nell to meet up with her after she cleaned herself up. The princess went to her room and decided to get ready for her meeting with the duke. Nell smiled and offered to help her get dressed right away. As soon as the maid got closer, she accidentally glanced at her hand. She noticed a tiny cut on the maid's finger. The girl smiled and figured she'd scratched herself when she fell. The princess didn't want a scar and asked Chloe to fetch some ointment. Nell tried to refuse, saying it wasn't that bad. Ivnis slathered the ointment on her hand and told her to keep it dry for a while. She practically ordered the girl to take some time off work and relax. Nell was over the moon that she was being taken care of like that. Right after that, the princess headed off to meet the duke. After a while, she finally arrived at the agreed-upon meeting place. She was surprised to see he'd invited her to a tea garden. Ivnis was instantly floored. The beauty of it just took her breath away. Besides being gorgeous, the garden was super warm thanks to some kind of spell. She gently touched a leaf and turned towards the duke's voice. He asked, all calm and cool, if she liked the place. The girl sat down at the table and said she totally loved this cute and elegant spot. The duke then asked if she wanted it as a gift. It was so out of left field, her eyes went wide with surprise. He said the garden was his, but he already had like 3 of them. Then, he straight up said he was willing to give it to her, if she was into it. The princess tried to refuse, saying she wouldn't even know how to take care of a place like this. Besides, he'd already given her a ton of stuff anyway. The second gifts came up, she remembered the necklace. The princess decided to get the lowdown on this family heirloom. She touched the piece and asked if it had anything to do with the sacred beast. His face totally gave away that he had no clue what she was talking about. She immediately got bummed when she realized he was clueless. The girl's attention snapped away when she heard strange men's voices. She checked out these 3 guys, wondering what their deal was with the duke. One of the guys straight up said he was surprised to see them together. The princess started freaking out, knowing they needed to put on a show of affection. The duke seemed to read her mind, touched her hand, and said he wanted to show her the garden. The princess innocently agreed, secretly burning up inside from his touch. The other guys immediately backed off, not wanting to intrude on the lovebirds. The girl pulled her hand away and complimented Terrence on keeping his cool. She didn't immediately get why he was looking at her so intently. He wanted to know more about how her visions worked. She explained that sometimes all it takes is direct contact. After explaining, the girl smiled and said they could hold hands a little longer. She definitely didn't expect the duke to take her joke seriously. He decided to play along and said they should give it a shot, now that she'd brought it up. The princess instantly blushed, trying to figure out what his deal was. She caught his intense stare and couldn't tell if he was messing with her. The guy locked eyes with her, asking if she saw something. The princess gave an awkward smile, pulled her hand away, and said she didn't see anything. He figured it was just because his days had been so boring lately. Ivnis decided to compliment him on his incredible acting skills. She guessed that in the original story, he was bad because he had feelings for Sorel. After a short pause, the duke turned to her, wanting to say something. To her surprise, he straight up told her that her acting was terrible. She definitely wasn't expecting to hear a comment like that from him. The princess felt a mix of inner frustration and straight-up anger bubbling up. She couldn't help but flash back to Sorel's comment about her acting being subpar. It pissed her off that she was even thinking about lines from the original story. She was clearly stung that he'd tried to call her out like that. Ivnus was stroking her ego with his weak performance in the novel and tried to remember what he said. In that chapter, he said he'd never acted like he was actually in love with someone before. After a long, awkward silence, the princess said she was sorry her performance wasn't up to par. She gave a sheepish smile and admitted she'd never really acted like she was head over heels for anyone before. The Duke took a sip of his tea and guessed that she'd had a similar kind of youth as him. The princess felt a pang of emotion, seeing his sad expression. Word on the street was the Duke's old man was a real player, and his mom passed away young. She couldn't help but think that line hit a little too close to home, considering his messed up past. Ivnus started freaking out even more, worried she'd put her foot in it. She figured she'd better change the subject quick and asked if they were heading anywhere else. He said he wanted to take her to the estate, but the private quarters weren't quite ready yet. The Duke added that she'd be able to see the rooms all decked out in a couple of days. She happily accepted his offer for a visit soon. Ivnus suddenly remembered that his younger brother also lived at the estate. She decided to ask if she'd get to meet him when she came to the estate. The guy calmly replied that they'd get acquainted down the road. The girl was surprised. She was sure he was going to snap at her. The Duke asked why she was reacting like that, since they were supposed to meet. Besides, Lot had wanted to meet the princess for ages. The girl perked up and said she should get a gift ready. She figured a gift was the best way to win a kid over. Ivnus clasped her hands, pleading, and asked if he'd go with her. He was taken aback at first, but collected himself and agreed. Meanwhile, the Empress had just received a message from her husband. You could tell by her face she was not happy with the message. It demanded that the princess's wedding be put on hold. Neither she nor his assistant understood the reason for such a sudden decision. She used to think it would be better for everyone if Ivnus got married sooner rather than later. She figured it had something to do with their, complicated situation. The late Empress was a princess from another country, raised with love. The second she married into the empire, her life became lonely and miserable. On top of that, the emperor wasn't in love with his wife, but with his mistress. Eventually, she passed away from a broken heart. Stepmom thought Iv was supposed to end up the same way, but things have taken a weird turn. She definitely wasn't expecting them to be chatting all sweet, like they were actually a couple. Even so, the Empress still didn't get why her husband was taking things this far. She figured the Duke's power could grow if Eve married someone else. That woman couldn't let the Duke fall for Ivnus. She crumpled the note in a rage, cursing the Emperor for his order. The guy mentioned that Princess Eve hadn't been feeling well lately. He wondered if she'd fully recovered in that time. The woman smirked, all sly, and said it would be a shame if she got sick. She made a big decision, thinking Eve getting sick would help call off the wedding. A few days later, Ivnus was finally able to visit the estate. She held her breath when she realized the carriage had finally arrived. She decided to wear an elegant blue dress on this cold winter day. The Duke was right there to greet her the second she stepped into the carriage. He dropped to one knee immediately, kissed her hand, and thanked her for coming. The Duke turned and pointed out his younger brother, who was standing behind him. The boy blushed, caught off guard, and greeted the princess. The princess smiled sweetly, happy they were finally meeting. She told him she'd brought him a gift and suggested he take a look. The girl presented him with a gorgeous model ship, which he totally loved. The princess had heard he wanted to become an admiral, so she got him a replica warship. Lot said that he'd also prepared a wedding gift for her. He shyly asked her to let him know if she wasn't happy with it. So, the girl agreed to check out the gift and ended up getting invited inside. Turns out, Lot had prepped 2 figurines, the Duke and the princess. The princess was blown away by the detail on those 2 dolls. She took a good long look at the 2 happy, cheerful little figures. She was seriously surprised at just how detailed the figurines were. Lot proudly popped open a little chest to show off the materials he'd used. Ivnus touched this weird goo that definitely wasn't any kind of glue she knew. She pulled her finger back, surprised, and asked what the heck it was. The girl saw the prototypes for the final figure and noticed they looked like, well, something less than flattering. Turns out, he'd been asking the knights to describe her looks before he started making the figurine. They always said she looked mean and reminded them of a monster. On top of that, they said her hair stuck out all over the place like snakes. The girl awkwardly looked away, feeling guilty that that's what they thought of her. Turns out, he based the final figurine on what Terrence said. She was surprised by how beautiful the Duke described her. She saw Lot's hesitation and said she really loved the gift. He smiled brightly and promised to finish the figurines before the wedding to give to her. The boy was sure she'd love the room they prepared for her. She said goodbye to Lot and said she'd be looking forward to his gift. She happily noticed that he treated her way better than she expected. The princess couldn't help but wonder how highly the Duke spoke of her. The next second, she was blown away by the size of her room. She never imagined they'd prepare such a lavish room for her. The maid told her to let her know if anything wasn't to her liking. This room was even bigger than the one she had back at the palace. She happily noted that she loved absolutely everything about it. The girl asked the maid if the Grand Duke was in the North Garden. He was standing by the family crypt, lost in childhood memories. He woke up one night and saw his father heading into another room. That same night, he learned something really bad had happened to his mother. Barely a couple days went by, and he was already at his mom's funeral. Terrence watched the ceremony, lost in thought, like he couldn't even cry. He looked up at the woman holding his hand and saw pure hatred in her eyes. Today, he came to lay a bouquet of flowers on her grave. He saw the smiling princess and asked if she'd checked out her room yet. The girl glanced at him and said her room was amazing. She took a few steps forward and noticed that same bouquet on the former duchess's grave. The princess clearly wasn't expecting him to keep those flowers she gave him. She remembered that yesterday was the anniversary of the Grand Duchess's death. The Duke just kept staring straight ahead, saying nothing. He decided to change the subject, said he wouldn't have to head south after all. Turns out the Emperor kinda jumped the gun on that whole rebellion thing. He was convinced it was a setup and decided to call off the deployment pronto. The Duke closed his eyes, said he'd just received some new intel. He found out Sir Gyron had a little powwow with the Empress, which means she might have gotten a message from the Emperor himself. After such a long day, the princess finally made it back to her palace. She stared thoughtfully at her reflection as they brushed her hair. She couldn't stop thinking about that message the Emperor sent. The Duke told her not to sweat it, said any rumors floating around wouldn't hurt her. She was on board with that, and figured it'd be tough to pin anything on the Duke. Even so, she doubted the Emperor would just drop the whole wipe them out thing. She sighed, totally drained, knowing she had to get to the bottom of this before it was too late. The princess spun around, surprised, when she felt a comb hit her hair. To her surprise, it was that maid, brushing her hair. Ivnis realized she was forgiven, then told her to hand over the comb and get lost. The second she touched the maid's hand, she got hit with another vision. She stared thoughtfully at this weird place. Looked like a warehouse or something. She accidentally overheard some maids talking about adding something to something else. The girl saw Lana reporting back to the head maid about a job well done. Her first thought was that Lana was planning to screw Nell over again. The maid suddenly claimed the princess started yelling because of a headache after indulging. They were talking about a concentrated potion made from certain leaves. The head maid said she got it from the Empress herself. The princess went white as a sheet, realizing her stepmother was poisoning her. Just as she started to dwell on it, she snapped back to reality. She kept her cool and just said she was feeling a little tired. After that, she ordered Lana to get out of her room. Now she knew the maid would soon be slipping the potion into her food, which would give her a killer headache. It was a total shock to her that her stepmother was behind it all. She knew they'd try to paint her as sick to postpone the wedding. The princess briefly considered banishing Lana to another palace. She immediately dismissed the idea, knowing it wouldn't solve anything. Besides, she realized Lana was her key to seeing the future. After that, she asked Nell if she'd summoned Sir Sheldon. The maid replied that she had, and also invited the Grand Duke to come this afternoon. The girl thanked the servant for doing a good job. The princess turned around when she heard a familiar man's voice. Michael Sheldon greeted Princess Ivnis with respect. The girl warmly invited him to sit across from her. The guy followed her lead and cut right to the chase, asking why he'd been summoned. She held out a necklace to him, saying she'd give it to him in exchange for a favor. Michael raised his eyebrows, all suspicious, and asked where she got it. She mentally cheered at his furious expression and said she'd found it again. It was worth it, because she held the Sorrel family heirloom in her hands. In the novel, Ivnis tossed it into the pond right in front of Sorrel. After that, she ordered the servants to find it, which pissed a lot of people off. The princess decided to find him and use him to get what she wanted. Michael Sheldon looked away, annoyed, and asked what she wanted from him. After a short pause, she revealed that one of her maids had a suspicious potion. The guy just stared at the princess, like he was trying to figure out what she was getting at. Ivnis just straight up said someone's gonna try to poison her before the wedding. She knew who was behind it, but was worried about blowing the whole thing before she had solid proof. Eve asked him to get the knights ready for her whenever she needed them. The guy didn't hesitate, just agreed, and said he'd help her out. The princess told him not to investigate this openly, to avoid stirring up a hornet's nest. She insisted he keep it on the down low until she gave the word. The guy calmly promised he'd follow her orders to the letter. The next second, the princess turned around and saw someone new. Duke Terrence was standing there, holding a beautiful bouquet. She couldn't figure out why he'd shown up early. Ivnis tried to play it cool, just pointing out he was ahead of schedule. He said he couldn't stand the thought of her waiting, then glanced at Michael. As soon as their eyes met, the knight decided it was time to bounce. He hurried past Terrence, catching a heavy glare as he went. The guy icily remarked that she had an appointment before him. The princess replied that she needed to ask something of both him and Sheldon. Then she asked if he still had any Arcania crystals. She asked to borrow one of those stones for something important. To her surprise, he just offered her a deal in exchange for the crystal. The princess held her breath, seeing that dangerous look in his eyes. He leaned in close, out of nowhere, and demanded she tell him Michael Sheldon's weakness. The guy was hinting at that whole thing, when she promised to keep the red brick secret. The princess couldn't reveal Michael and Sorel's vulnerability. She didn't want him meddling and screwing up the original storyline. In the end, she decided to refuse this guy's help. The man was so bummed and ticked off, he actually scowled. The princess tensed up, not understanding why he looked so serious. In the original story, Terrence never tried to take him down using that weakness. She tried to explain that the information just wasn't that important. The girl clutched her chest, saying she wasn't keeping the secret because of feelings for Michael. The Duke repeated her words thoughtfully, then asked why she needed the crystal. She waited for him to sit down at the table and told him about the Emperor's plans. Ivnis filled him in on her vision and that dangerous potion. She said she was planning to turn the tables by faking an illness. That way, she hoped to trap Lana and her accomplice. She was certain they'd meet at the warehouse if she got sick. The girl wanted to pretend she'd fallen into their trap while setting one of her own. The Duke smiled and said he'd send the crystal through her maid. He told her to take care of herself and reminded her about her promise regarding her abilities. The girl promised everything would be all right and headed to her room. She thoughtfully examined the arcane crystal bracelet on her wrist. She was fascinated by the crystal's power, and that made her want more of them. She was pulled away from admiring the bracelet when she heard a voice. The girl looked up and realized Lady Diana was standing in front of her. The guest sincerely thanked her for her concern and said she was feeling better. Eve told her that she'd been practicing her embroidery lately. She touched a part of the embroidery with her finger and said she just couldn't get it right. Diana smiled and offered to help her learn an easier way to embroider. The princess happily agreed and started Diana's lesson. In just a couple of minutes, Ivness managed to create a beautiful design on the fabric. The girl looked at the fabric and wondered if everyone in her family had crafting skills. She couldn't help but imagine Terrence trying to embroider something. Diana decided to lighten the mood and asked if she'd given any thought to the wedding dress. The princess explained that she'd been asked to sketch out a design for the dress. Diana cheerfully offered to help her create the design for the dress. The princess supported her idea and started bringing her imagination to life on paper. The next moment, she showed off a version that was, not exactly perfect. Diana tried to hide her surprise and called the drawing cute. The princess admitted that she was really bad at crafts, but Diana encouraged her. She said the dress needed some bling and offered to spice it up. Ivnis pointed out that her touch made the dress look way classier. She decided to stick with the detailed design Diana suggested. Nell suddenly burst into the room, announcing the crown prince was here. The princess was surprised, since he'd said he was swamped. The next thing you know, the crown prince is already in her room. He glanced at Ivnis's guest and asked who the heck this girl was. Diana instantly blushed and greeted him, looking down. The princess suddenly remembered Arantine had no clue who Diana was. She knew that kind of aloof reaction from the prince could sting. She jumped right in, saying Diana was helping her design a dress. The guy played it cool, just said he hadn't seen her in ages and was glad she was doing well. The princess smiled, relieved that crisis was averted. She glanced at Lady Diana, who was blushing like crazy, totally red-faced. Evnis froze, totally confused, trying to figure out why she looked like that. Before she could say anything, the girl said she'd be right back. The guy decided to ignore Diana's reaction and mentioned that Iv was working on some embroidery. He tried to say it was actually turning out pretty good. Right after that, he said he was planning on heading back to the front lines as soon as the snow stopped. The girl forced a smile and told him not to worry about her. She already knew that in the original story, he didn't return until Eve's wedding. She needed him to figure out the potion, but he hadn't shown his face once in all 4 tea parties. Ivnis was deep in thought about exactly when she should slip the potion in. Arantine noticed her hesitation and asked if something was bothering her. He guessed that it might have something to do with the Grand Duke. The girl immediately thought that this was the real reason he came. He said that this guy was trouble, even if she was sweet on him. She tried to argue, but he just told her to come to him if she needed help. The princess was stunned, because in the original story, he hated her guts. He apologized for showing up unannounced, and then headed off to take care of business. Arantine slowly walked out of the room, giving Lady Diana one last nod. As soon as he was gone, Diana let out a tired sigh. The girl confessed she was embarrassed to be seen looking like that. That comment made the princess realize her friend's self-worth was way lower than she thought. Ivnis told her she was already amazing and suggested they finish the dress. She stared at her friend, trying to figure out why she liked Arantine so much. They ended up working on the dress until evening came. As soon as Ivnis was alone, Lana decided to bring her some tea. She saw the girl in the doorway and told her to come in. The princess noticed her hands were shaking something fierce. She immediately figured Lana would try to slip her the potion today. The girl decided to get rid of the maid and asked her to draw a bath. As soon as the maid left the room, she started her check. Out of habit, she slipped the gemstone bracelet off her wrist. After that, she removed a bead and dropped it into a cup of the drink. She smiled when she realized the potion was in there, and it was time to put her plan into action. A few days later, Lana started hearing new rumors from the maids. They were talking about how the princess had been having headaches nonstop for days. Lana listened to them gossiping about her condition and knew it was time to make her move. She snapped at the maids, telling them to get back to work instead of flapping their gums. The girl was pissed that the princess wouldn't call for a doctor. She decided to ask about it herself, since the promised time was almost up. Lana went to her boss and told her about the princess's pain. The woman repeated the same line that Eve saw in her vision. She slammed a bag of coins on the table and ordered Lana to get out of the mansion before the wedding. Lana smirked, hoping the princess wouldn't, kick the bucket. After that, she headed towards the exit with the coins in her hand. She barely made it out of the storage room when knights appeared in the doorway. The women froze, realizing their scheme had been exposed. They definitely weren't expecting the Imperial Knights themselves to show up. The next day, Mikhail told me they nabbed them right at the meetup spot. The princess was stoked that everything went down exactly as planned. The arrest was a piece of cake, since the princess knew where they'd be. She had Nell and Chloe sniff out exactly when they were going to hold that meeting. The princess took a sip of her tea and asked if they'd ID'd the other woman. Mikhail said she's the Empress's personal maid. Ivnis was visibly surprised, not expecting her stepmother to be so careless. Looks like she thought Iv was such a chump that she could get away with anything. The girl found out the maids were locked up in the princess's palace dungeon. They needed to be taken to Imperial Knights HQ, but the Emperor had a mole there. She ordered Michael to guard them until she made a new decision. The girl held out a box to him, the one with the sorrel necklace inside. Michael frowned, deep in thought, and asked why the Empress was treating her like this. The girl refused to answer, and just told him to tell everyone he was simply following orders. Michael had to back down, but he was still worried about the whole thing. He took the box and told her to let him know if anything like this happened again. And he added that next time, she wouldn't have to pay him. The girl immediately thought he saw her as some poor princess getting pushed around by her stepmother. She was stoked about her good luck and promised to remember his kindness. Then she got up and said she had somewhere she needed to be. Turns out she had to have a meeting with the crown prince. That same night, Ivnis showed up at his palace to talk things over. The knight was clearly surprised to see the princess at this hour. He greeted the proud, smiling girl who came on business. She learned that both the crown prince and the empress were in the same room right now. The second she walked in, she heard the empress going off about the, situation with her maid. The crown prince said he didn't know what she was talking about and told her to chill. He then turned around and saw that Iv was also there in the office. The princess confessed that she invited the empress to tell her something important. She announced that a certain maid was caught trying to, let's just say, spice up her tea. The prince did a double take, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. She explained that her maid was cleaning Lana's room and found a suspicious little bottle of potion. After that, she used a crystal and found out someone had been slipping the potion into her tea. The new maid explained that the potion wasn't life-threatening, but it did cause killer migraines. Ivnis faked being sick and ordered Lana to be watched until she was discovered in the pantry. The maid sensed something was off and decided to call the knights. The empress tried to shut her down when she started talking about an accomplice. The princess held her breath and brought up the knight's report. She shot the woman a hurt look and said the maid was from her palace. The empress recoiled like she'd been splashed with boiling water. The prince, stone-faced, wanted to know where the accomplices were being held. He ordered them shipped to the precinct for a real grilling. The empress was so blindsided, she couldn't even get a word out. The prince turned to the woman and asked for the green light on an investigation. He pressed her, wanting to know if there were any other players in the palace. The woman immediately pushed back, saying there wasn't a shred of evidence against the maid. She refused to believe the knights, even though they delivered a full report. The princess smirked and said they'd get to the bottom of this before the emperor arrived. The woman tried to swallow her rage, realizing she was cornered. The princess figured this whole plan had popped up out of nowhere because of the emperor. She was stoked that the empress's prep work was such a joke. The prince said it was a damn shame this happened right before the wedding. He turned to Ivnis and told her to let him know if there was anything he could do for her. The princess happily closed her eyes and said she actually did have a favor to ask. She asked to stay in the Grand Temple until her wedding with the Duke. The Empress blew a gasket, 'cause she was bringing it up again. She said she'd decided to spend some time in prayer at the monastery after what was said. The princess knew how tough the monks' lives were and wanted to stay at the main palace. Ivnis added that she'd definitely be totally safe there. The prince thought it was a smart idea and asked if she was sure that's what she wanted. She said it would be best if she just stayed put in the palace, quietly. Out of nowhere, Arantine announces she's off probation. He was betting the emperor would agree with him after dropping that bombshell. The empress froze, totally stunned, trying to figure out her next move. She stormed off, telling them to just do whatever they thought was best. The princess figured the empress wasn't interested in hearing anything else. She was still mulling it over when the prince started talking to her. He said he'd have his knights escort her if she was really heading to the main palace. The girl was surprised. since he'd said he was going back to the battlefield soon. He said that after everything that's happened, he can't just leave the capital unguarded. The princess was lost in thought, wondering how much this would change the course of history. She hoped everything would be all right, since he wasn't a major player in the grand scheme of things. The man glanced at his sister and told her to keep him in the loop if anything went down. He clenched his fist, saying he hadn't been around much, but he wouldn't leave her hanging. Arantine pressed a hand to his chest and earnestly asked her to trust him on this. The princess couldn't believe she was actually hearing all of this. She thought he hated and avoided Eve, but she never really tried to get where he was coming from. She smiled, realizing he actually cared about her like a brother should. The girl smiled genuinely and decided she would put more faith in him. That same day, she got ready to head over to the temple. The temple attendant greeted her and showed her to the residence where she'd be staying. They'd prepped a spot near the Lastan temple where her wedding would take place. In 5 days, the holy day of Lastan begins, and they'll light the lanterns around the temple. The girl promised she'd think about it and thanked her for her consideration. The holy day of Lastan was held in honor of the god of love. On this day, everyone lit lanterns, and lovers made vows and kept them together. She asked where she needed to go to visit the shrine of the god of craftsmanship. Once she got the info she needed, she decided to head there. She had more than one reason for wanting to get into the palace. There was something she needed to snag from the shrine of the god of craftsmanship before the festival. She dumped all her worries on the maids and decided to take a stroll. The air around the estate was nice at first, but now a biting winter wind was slapping her in the face. She didn't realize where she'd wandered off to at first, just kind of drifted around the grounds. She looked up and realized she'd stopped at the Lastan temple. The princess couldn't help but remember, this was where they hung the lanterns. They symbolized your intention to spend your whole life with just one person. She muttered to herself that it had nothing to do with her. No sooner had she said that than her necklace started glowing real weird. Iveness clutched at her throat after seeing that strange flash. She glanced down at the necklace and figured it was just static electricity. She blamed the dry winter air and put the necklace back on. She definitely wasn't expecting to run into someone she knew right then. The princess didn't even realize how Sir Sheldon ended up next to her. He said he was there to protect her, along with the Emperor's escort. Ivness was surprised to realize the Arantine Knights were stationed there with the palace guard. She couldn't help but think about his commander, Gayren, who wasn't exactly her biggest fan. Eve wondered if it was because the commander had turned his back on him after what happened yesterday. She was taken aback when he gave her a completely unexpected answer. He said he had to make sure the princess was safe, so she shouldn't worry. Michael said he was just doing his duty and didn't care if some people didn't like him. She said, kinda shy, that she appreciated his sudden compliments. After a short pause, he asked if she'd heard the news. Turns out Princess Sorrel and Prince Bilos are coming back from the war. Bilos seems nice, but he's actually a cruel and wicked dude. For some reason, the Emperor's got a soft spot for Bilos, so he knew about the plot to off Eve. Bilos wasn't shocked by this. On the contrary, he was stoked. In the original story, he didn't even show up until after the wedding. Turns out, the Emperor said he could handle things himself and sent them to the capital. She immediately wondered if he knew about what went down yesterday. She also figured the Emperor might have known his wife was gonna fail. Eveness knew she needed to get ready for his arrival. She was convinced she had to make Sorrel an ally. The princess planned to leverage Terrence and Michael's infatuation with her. She wasn't sure if she could change Sorrel's attitude after everything that had gone down. Even so, Sorrel had always gravitated towards Ivness and could reciprocate her feelings. Meanwhile, the girl was already heading back to the palace. The next day, Ivness decided to host a tea party with the ladies. They thanked her for the invite, knowing how busy she was getting ready for the wedding. Ivness thanked them in return for accepting her invitation. They asked how she was feeling, since the invitation mentioned something had happened. After talking with Mikhail, she sent out invitations to the society's big players. She figured they'd show up out of curiosity, but damn, they were quick about it. Guess they realized this could shake things up in the Imperial Palace. Eventually, she spilled the whole story, every last detail of what happened. She innocently hoped the truth would come out sooner rather than later. She knew they'd figure out it was the Empress who tried to take her out. They tried to be supportive, but their eyes told a different story. Now, all she could do was let the rumors spread like wildfire. At that moment, the last thing she expected was for the Grand Duke to show up. To her surprise, both his voice and his eyes showed real concern. He dropped to one knee, begging forgiveness for his rough entrance. Terrence said he was genuinely sorry he couldn't protect her. The ladies present were stunned by how open he was being. The princess got flustered and replied that she was all right. She was amazed at how convincing his act was. He said he'd brought his knights and promised to check on her safety every day. He apologized to everyone for showing up unannounced and causing a disturbance. Besides, the Duke subtly hinted that it was time for them to leave. After those words, the ladies quickly got up, remembering their important engagements. They hurried out of the room, gossiping about how the rumors were true. Terrence watched them go, lost in thought, like he wanted to say something. His whole demeanor shifted, and he grilled her about why she went to the temple instead of the emperor's villa. Terrence saw she was annoyed and asked if something was bothering her. The girl set her cup down and said she came here to find something out. She also learned that he wouldn't have to leave after the wedding if things down south went smoothly. He said he'd have to leave the capital for a couple of days soon. The princess asked if he came to flaunt their relationship to everyone. The duke looked away, lost in thought, and said there was another reason too. Then, he put his hand over his heart and announced he was leaving. The princess watched him go, like she couldn't quite process what just happened. Duke Terrence bounced out of here right after that little chat. The princess glanced out the window and saw Lady Diana waiting in the reception room. She was there to let her know the wedding dress designs were ready. The princess practically sprinted to the meeting to check them out. Diana mentioned she saw a black cat, but it vanished in a flash. She said she'd heard about what went down recently and was glad she was okay. Oh, and she also brought a bunch of different wedding dress design options. The princess flipped through them, totally engrossed, and realized she loved them all. She noticed this kind of sad look on Lady Diana's face. The girl told Ivnes that Prince Belos and Sorrel had a major falling out. Word on the street was they had a major blow-up about executing prisoners of war. And that's why the princess got put on probation. They clashed in the original story too, but Sorrel never got probation. The princess started thinking about how her actions were changing everything. She's messed with the plot big time just to survive, but who knows where it's headed. Diana asked if she was planning on staying put until the wedding. Sounds like she's stoked about seeing Eve more often than just around the palace. She added that the view of the Laston Temple is killer from here. Diana mentioned that if you write your sweetheart's name inside a flower lantern, your wish is guaranteed to come true. The lantern's supposed to be for wishing for forever love, and she wondered if she'd launch one with Terrence. The princess immediately imagined how the guy would react. During their conversation, she found out Diana had also been at the festival. Ever since then, Eve tried to see a new vision, but there was no future where Diana lived. Even so, she refused to give up hope that she could change things. The princess flashed a bright smile and suggested they go to the festival together. She said they could grab dinner during the celebration and then check out the lanterns. Just then, she felt that familiar little tingle at the back of her neck again. Looks like Diana noticed the gemstone starting to glow too. The princess explained it was a family heirloom from the Grand Duke's house. She realized all the changes started after it changed color. Now, she was even more curious about what kind of stone that was in the jewelry. That evening, she thanked the maid for unpacking her things. She felt awkward asking, but she asked her to stay with her for the night. Chloe agreed when she heard there was a place she wanted to go at dawn. After that, she thanked Chloe for agreeing to help. On the way to their room, they ran into Nell, who had discovered a storage closet. There wasn't anything in it except some unused junk. They decided to look around inside and found it was kind of cozy. Nell mentioned the closet even had an attic you could get to through a hatch. She offered to pull the cord from the ceiling to show them. After that, the hatch opened up, and they even lowered a ladder. Nell already checked it out, and it's full of old books and boxes of random stuff. The princess agreed that the storage room was definitely abandoned. Nell offered to clean it up, but Eve refused and said she wouldn't be using it. Even so, she thought it could be a good hiding spot. That same night, she decided to sneak out of the room. She quietly knocked on the door, and a sleepy Chloe came out. The princess apologized for having to disturb her rest. She said they needed to go through the garden and get to the chapel next to the temple. Eve was sure it wouldn't take long, since there wasn't any security. The girls froze solid when Chloe heard footsteps. The princess instantly suggested hiding in the bushes and spotted a knight. She figured right away that he must have seen the light from her lamp. Ivnis squeezed her eyes shut, scared. Trying to think of a plan, fast. Her eyes popped open when she heard a voice she knew. The princess saw Michael had shown up and was questioning the knight. The guy explained he saw a light deep in the garden and came to investigate. Michael told him he'd check out the area so he could patrol outside. As soon as he left, Michael turned to the princess and told her she could come out. They had no choice but to step out of their hiding spot. He decided to find out why she was wandering around here so late. She replied that she had some personal business to take care of at the chapel. The princess insisted he shouldn't interfere and asked him to be understanding. After a short pause, he agreed not to stop them. She thought she'd gotten off easy, but he offered to escort her. Looks like Ivnis wasn't expecting to pick up another tag-along. Sir Sheldon insisted on ensuring her safety along the way. She couldn't exactly tell him that Chloe was a top-notch bodyguard. Ultimately, she agreed to his unwelcome condition. Chloe tried to get her attention, but she said everything was fine. She said she'd let him escort her, but only under one condition. Eve insisted that he not ask what she was doing, and that he keep everything a secret. The guy agreed, and they headed to the chapel in silence. The princess was surprised to find the sanctuary way gloomier than she'd expected. The god of craftsmanship was considered tainted, so no one ever sought him out. This temple was off limits to regular folks, which is why she decided to check the archives. Sir Sheldon pointed her to a door and suggested she go through it. He said he'd worked at the temple briefly when he was younger and knew it well. This info was already mentioned in the original story, which just highlighted who he really was. Even the way he looked was more like a priest than a knight. No sooner had they headed down the stairs than they spotted a door. The princess cracked the door open and told them to hang back outside. Lamp in hand, she ventured forward and noticed this weird-looking room. She was trying to find anything cool amidst the dusty shelves. After a couple of seconds, she finally noticed a brick that was a different color. Turns out, it was a mechanism that only responded to the royal family's blood. Inside, she found these massive roots from the sacred tree, crawling all over the walls. After a while, she finally found a crack where some kind of substance was seeping out. Getting to the inner temple to snag some of that tree sap was exactly what she wanted. It flowed from the roots of the sacred tree and had incredible healing power. According to the original story, Sorel finds him in 2 years. After that, she sells him to the merchant guild to pay for her living expenses. For Eve, this juice was vital, since she was constantly in danger. She mentally apologized to Sorel and promised to pay her back. After that, she rushed back and said everything was fine. She brushed the dust off her robe and felt Michael's gaze. The princess asked if he was curious about what happened inside. He only asked if there would be any nasty repercussions from her actions. The princess put on a thoughtful face and said it wasn't a big deal. He said he wouldn't pry, and that his duty was to protect the princess. He added that he wasn't worried about anything as long as she was safe and sound. After a short pause, he said he understood how crazy things were with the emperor's business. She was surprised to realize he actually felt sorry for her right now. She knew he probably did think she was pathetic, seeing her all alone like this. As soon as she saw the sunrise, she wondered if Michael knew Sorel was back. He stopped and asked if she was planning on seeing the princess. She looked down, saying there were a lot of things she wanted to apologize for. He turned around and decided to ask why she hated Sorel. From his point of view, the princess didn't seem like someone who'd hurt a fly. The princess considered mentioning the reason from the novel's story. After a short pause, she chalked it up to plain old jealousy. The girl looked down, defeated, and said Sorel had everything she ever wanted. She had a beautiful personality, holy powers, and everyone's love and attention. Unlike her, Evenus was younger and considered a dud saint. That's why she was jealous of Sorel, who everyone actually loved. This jealousy festered into resentment because she couldn't be like Sorel. Even in her past life, she felt envy and bitterness seeing happy families. She knew better than anyone how despair can make you feel utterly worthless. Eve sighed, knowing it wasn't right to hurt others because of it. Michael stated that the princess had truly suffered all these years. Even so, the guy added that he knew the feeling. He figured it was tough having a brother or sister who's good at everything. The princess was floored by what Michael just said. It made her think that he knew Terrence was his half-brother. The girl straight up asked him if he had a brother. Michael thoughtfully replied that it was true, even if they were half-brothers. Evenus went silent, stunned, trying to figure out when he found out. She wanted to grab him by the shoulders and ask where he got that info, but she couldn't. Michael held out a leather pouch and offered to personally return Sorel's necklace. Evenus was surprised, since she figured the princess wouldn't even want to see her. Mikhail smiled, saying Sorel wouldn't hold a grudge about it. She couldn't help but wonder if Sorel had ever hated her. Evenus wanted to ask Mikhail what made him so sure. She was about to ask, but a familiar male voice cut them off. Standing before them was the Duke, looking pissed and agitated all at once. The princess froze, realizing how messed up this whole scene looked. Just this morning, they'd agreed to meet in a more private setting. Evenus couldn't figure out why she felt so awkward all of a sudden. She tried to put the Duke at ease with some dumb small talk about the food. He just coldly replied that he was fine, and she should eat something herself. Evenus couldn't help but notice how bummed out her fiancé was. He brought up how he said he'd stick around here before heading to the capital. Evenus remembered that, but she wasn't expecting him to show up so early. She asked him to understand, saying she was just double-checking something. She tried to explain that she'd gone out with Chloe at dawn to grab something. He remembered the maid being with her and asked what exactly she was looking for. Evenus placed a small bottle of sacred tree root juice on the table. You can only harvest it 5 days before the holy day of Enshi, right before sunrise. The Duke wanted to know where she got that kind of intel. She explained that he wouldn't know about the juice because she learned about it through, let's just say, a special insight. Finally, it hit him. She wasn't here for a date, but for something serious. She added that's exactly why she was willing to go it alone. Meeting Sheldon on the way to the chapel? The girl called it a coincidence. She wanted to clear that up, avoid any confusion. The Duke bought her story and asked if there was a reason they knew each other so well. Evenus felt flustered, because she didn't want to spill the real reason. Every time Michael's name came up, the air just seemed to get colder. She figured it'd be bad form to bring up their history first. Eve just decided to vaguely apologize and say Sir Sheldon would be helping him out down the line. The Duke smirked and said she was terrible at lying. He saw she was upset and told her he believed she wasn't lying. His gaze darkened as he realized she was holding something back. The man's icy tone instantly put the princess on edge. She couldn't fool him with half-truths, but she couldn't reveal everything she knew either. All she could do was pretend she'd found out they were half-brothers. She feigned sadness and said she didn't want to hurt him by talking about the vision. Ignis apologized for him not liking her being secretive. The man got angry and said she misunderstood him and that he and Sheldon weren't connected in that way. As soon as she started to say that's not what she meant, he cut her off, saying he was just kidding. He understood how tough it must be to be around someone who can see secrets. Even after everything, Ignis genuinely believed he would help Terrence down the line. Mikhail had said he wanted to help his half-brother. She silently begged him not to suspect her, since she was going off the original story. Eventually, Terrence heard her out and said he understood. He agreed and said Sir Sheldon really was his brother on their dad's side. Terrence asked her to keep it under wraps, since he thought he was the only one who knew. He fixed her with that icy stare and said there was something else. Out of the blue, he declared he didn't want Sir Sheldon anywhere near them. Terrence demanded it, no matter what she saw in her visions. She couldn't help but wonder if he was trying to hold Mikhail back. The girl couldn't believe he was talking about them, not the people. Ignis figured he was just worried about who would inherit the title. In this world, even kids born on the wrong side of the blanket had a claim. If Terrence kicked the bucket, Lot would get the title. But there were complications. Mikhail works for the Emperor, who could definitely use him as a tool. Terrence was afraid his family would become pawns in the Emperor's game. Still, she didn't get why he hadn't just taken Mikhail out of the picture already. At the end of the day, all she could do was accept Terrence's point of view. She promised to do what he wanted and reminded him she'd be a duchess soon. He was quietly stoked that they were on the same page and blushed like crazy. The princess picked up on his weird reaction right away. Nell came in and said a priest had arrived from the main building. He brought the paperwork for prepping the ceremony at the temple itself. The kid was shaking like a leaf, trying to say the high priest apologized for the delay. He was scared she'd blow a gasket because the report was late. She knew the real Eve would have been all over every tiny detail. She hurried to take the report and accidentally brushed the kid's hand. The next thing she knew, she felt the temple engulfed in roaring flames. It all happened so fast, she didn't realize it was a vision at first. She tried to brush away the fire that was consuming everything around her, except for her. She turned around and saw the exact house she was staying in. The princess didn't immediately get what the vision was trying to tell her. The next moment, she felt the house and the temple burning to the ground. Right after that, the girl snapped back to reality and her eyes flew open. The priest got spooked, thinking something was wrong. The girl smiled and said she'd look over the report later. She instantly realized the building in her vision was the temple where her wedding was supposed to be. She learned from Terrence that the temple was made of wood on the inside. That explained why the fire seemed so intense. Terrence noticed her acting weird, and then she told him about the vision. The guy asked if she'd seen anything else besides that. She explained it was nighttime, and there were lanterns everywhere. They both figured it'd go down on the day of the Rastana festival. This vision popped up the moment she was thinking about the wedding. Handing over the papers, she started wondering if they'd torch the temple just to stop the wedding. Terrence, like he read her mind, said this wasn't just going to be about stopping the wedding. The girl was surprised and decided they should compare notes. She agreed that was way too high a price to pay, just to ruin a wedding. She admitted she couldn't be sure of anything yet, and the fire might be an accident. Terrence suggested they play it safe until they got more intel. He promised to visit her when he got back to the capital and told her to take care of herself. The princess promised to be careful and realized her tea had gone cold. Before leaving, Terrence pointed out that she even called him by his first name when they were alone. She used to call him Your Grace, but things are different now. Just remembering all those times made her eyes widen in shock. She apologized for being inappropriate and said she just felt comfortable around him. The princess couldn't believe she'd actually let her guard down around a guy like him. She figured he hated everything she'd said to him. But despite what she thought, those words brought a gentle smile to his face. He told her to call him whatever she wanted, and then he left. The princess blushed when she realized he was smirking just a little. The next day, she decided to check out the Rastan temple herself. It was so gorgeous. It was hard to believe it was made of wood. She couldn't believe a place like this was going to go up in flames. She found out they were planning on hanging lanterns inside the temple. She knew that would be the perfect setup for a fire to break out. She thanked her escort and decided she needed to dig a little deeper. The princess felt lost, trying to figure out how to stop the fire. It could only work if the fire looked like a total accident. She realized her only option was to try and catch the guy responsible. The girl was visibly surprised to run into Sir Sheldon again. She said she'd decided to check out the temple before the wedding. She promised Terrence she'd avoid the night, but it was becoming impossible. He mentioned that the festival of Enshi was coming up soon. She wanted to see all the beautiful lanterns, but the thought of a fire freaked her out. She decided to ask if he was planning on making a lantern. The princess figured he'd be making one with Sorel, but he said he wasn't interested. He reminded her that he was going to be escorting her during the festival. She used to think it was about time he fell for Sorel. Michael decided to leave and told her to reach out if she needed anything. She said goodbye, secretly hoping things would work out between him and Sorel. The next second, Nell started shouting, drawing everyone's attention. She announced that the Grand Duke had sent her a special letter. The princess was surprised he'd sent a letter so soon after leaving. It said the situation in the south was resolved, and he'd be able to return to the Empire soon. He suggested they attend a party at Marquise Cornell's mansion together. She hadn't been to a social event in ages and was thrilled by the idea. The girl turned to her maid and asked for help getting ready for the party. That evening, the Grand Duke's carriage arrived to pick her up. The man casually remarked that nothing had happened in the 2 days he'd been gone. The girl smiled and said that, luckily, nothing bad happened. She added that the Temple of Rastan still held her attention. The Duke said the problem in the south would be resolved soon, and he wouldn't have to go on the expedition. In addition to that, he reported to the Crown Prince that he'd be canceling that southern expedition. The Crown Prince replied that it would be tough to change the established plans, but he'd try. The princess was surprised that her brother agreed to get so involved in this. Terrence suggested that the Crown Prince also noticed something fishy about the latest incident. They still haven't investigated the medicine and the maid's identity enough to confidently accuse the Empress. The prince was helping Terrence stay in the Empire, which showed how serious he was. Terrence clasped his hands and said that there was more news. Eve felt a chill in her chest when she heard her father was coming back to the Empire. She decided to double-check if Bilos and Sorel were heading here too. Those two got sent out before we even knew what the Empress was up to. The Emperor's supposed to be back in the Empire in a week, 10 days max. Ivnis started freaking out, thinking the whole storyline could get messed up. She was having doubts about whether she could handle this, whether she could trust her visions completely. Terrence touched her hand and told her she had no reason to worry her pretty little head. He added that the Empress wouldn't do anything rash right away. The princess blushed when she realized he was trying to comfort her. Terrence said the party was going to be a real zoo and suggested she chill out while she could. The princess quietly agreed, noticing how warm his hands were. Even with his support, she still felt this weird, uneasy feeling. Meanwhile, Bilos was heading straight for the celebration. His assistant asked if he was really going to show his face there. He smirked and said he wanted to see his sister's reaction after all this time. After a while, Terrence and Ivnis finally arrived at the formal party. The beautiful noblewomen instantly went silent when they saw them together. Their eyes immediately locked onto the Grand Duke and the princess. They were instantly convinced that all the rumors were true. The princess smiled proudly as they talked about the latest gossip. She was stoked that word about this whole thing had already spread among the nobles. One of the ladies walked up to the couple and told them they looked amazing together. Turns out, this mature lady was the hostess herself, the Marchioness Cornell. Ivnis thanked her for the invite and said the party was fantastic. The woman smiled sweetly and said she was becoming more beautiful every day. Ivnis knew she was just trying to smooth things over, afraid she'd ruin the party. The Marchioness decided to bring up the fact that the Duke was supposed to head off to battle soon. The guy said that while that was the plan, the situation down south had been resolved. The Marchioness asked if his presence wouldn't be needed after all. The princess smirked slyly and knew it was her turn to jump in. She snuggled up to the guy and said everything was exactly as she'd said it would be. Ivnis stroked his chest and said she worried sick every single day he was in battle. Nobody even knew she'd been training like crazy ever since Terrence chewed her out. She was surprised at how stressed Terrence looked. She figured she'd crossed a line and decided to apologize when they were alone. The guy pulled her close and said seeing the princess was more important than any mission. Marchioness Cornell blushed at all the passion and was happy for them. The princess felt like she was even a little creeped out by how fake it all seemed. She wondered if Terrence had been practicing while she was away. The Marchioness decided to change the subject and asked if she was still staying at the temple. She casually dropped some rumors about a little incident at the Imperial Palace. Ivnis knew right away what the Marchioness really wanted to know. The princess put on a sad face and gave her the whole juicy story about the poisoning. The Marchioness feigned sympathy and asked what would drive someone to do that. Iv added that she was even more worried about the Empress, since the culprit was her personal maid. The Marchioness chimed in, guessing that the Empress must be incredibly distraught. She wondered if the woman was planning on sticking around the palace for the time being. The Marchioness tried to brush off the servant, but he kept pushing for her attention. The next second, she heard the sound of a man's footsteps approaching. The princess's eyes went wide when she heard the second prince had arrived. Bilos locked eyes with her, a real cocky look in his eye. Right away, the princess figured the emperor had ordered him to keep tabs on them. She wanted to blow him off, but he was one of the guys involved in the whole scheme. Eve brought up the poisoning incident, saying she was safe thanks to Terrence. Bilos thanked him, and Terrence, all lovey-dovey, said it was his duty. This whole romantic scene just left the second prince speechless. He was floored that all those rumors were actually on the level. The princess decided to keep the pressure on and grabbed Bilos' hands. She told him he should go smooth things over with the empress after everything that went down. He asked if she was getting all soft now that she's about to tie the knot. Ivnis was sure he was surprised by how suddenly she grabbed his hand like that. She kept squeezing his hands, hoping she'd finally get a vision. Bilos tried to leave, saying he had to get back to the emperor's palace. The princess tried to stop him, begging him to at least have some tea. He said everything was fine, and he shouldn't interrupt their time together. Bilos decided to end the conversation and squeezed her fingers. He made a show of kissing her palm and said he'd see her again soon. The princess told herself to forget about that and focus on the vision. A second later, she finally managed to slip into that vision state. Once again, she watched the temple of Rastan go up in flames. The girl knew it. She'd foreseen the day the temple would go up in flames. She figured it had happened during the festival too. The princess froze when she spotted that shady-looking dude in the robe. She clocked the priest get up right away, figured he was some kind of holy man. But something felt off. Like, why was he so chill watching the fire? The guy was slowly backing away from the temple, constantly looking over his shoulder. Ivnis realized he was heading straight for the building where she was staying. He struck a match, tossed it, and bam! Her place was on fire too. The guy started lighting the lanterns, trying to spread the fire to her house. She was trying to figure out why he torched two places at once. The girl was taken aback when she noticed one seriously important detail. She glanced out the window and realized she'd been asleep inside the house. Chloe and Nell weren't around, and she was weirded out that she hadn't woken up. Besides that, there weren't any knights patrolling the area around the building, like they were supposed to. Even though it was just a vision, she felt like her whole body was on fire. She felt a deep dread, like she was staring death right in the face. All she could do was watch as everything around her burned to the ground. As soon as the glass shattered, giving her a clear view into the room, her jaw dropped. The next thing she knew, she snapped back to reality. Bilos noticed her confusion and gripped her shoulders to keep her from falling. The girl said everything was cool and apologized for keeping him waiting. The guy just calmly said goodbye and that they'd see each other soon. Eve felt that tension again when she remembered everything she'd seen. She was convinced Bilos was behind all those fires. The girl went to the room with the Duke and said that Bilos was the one who started the fire. The Duke said it didn't seem like something he'd do to stop the wedding. The princess felt like he'd make it look like an accident to off her. Her brother sent her to the temple based on his personal feelings and assigned his knights to her. They figured that way everyone would forget about what happened with her stepmom. The princess knew that after the temple fire, all the servants would flock somewhere else. What also struck her as weird was that she was asleep in the vision, and nobody came into her room. He figured she might have been dosed with some kind of sleeping incense. Ivnis remembered that it was common practice to burn incense in the temple, just like at her place. The Duke thought Bilos could have slipped some knockout incense into the censer. The princess hadn't even considered that they might use something like that on her. Her hands started shaking when she realized she could have kicked the bucket if it wasn't for the vision. Terrence noticed her sadness and asked if she was doing all right. The princess snapped out of it right away and lied, saying she was fine. She felt genuine fear of death, but she still couldn't give up. She promised herself she'd never die according to their little scheme and would survive to the bitter end. Eve was going to play possum, pretend she was knocked out by the sleeping incense. On top of that, she had a potion ready to go if things went south. Terrence shot up, all worked up, and reminded her what he'd already said. The princess held her breath, totally clueless what he was going to do next. He gripped her shoulders tight and told her she couldn't just recklessly throw herself into danger like that. The Duke, his head full of worry, said he couldn't stand the thought of her getting hurt. Meanwhile, Bilos had just arrived at the imperial palace. The second his underling opened his mouth, BAM! He got a smack across the face. He yelled at him, demanding to know if he was even capable of handling the job. The guy lowered his eyes, feeling like crap, and apologized for screwing up. Bilos plopped into the chair, fuming that he'd been outsmarted by a ditz like Ivnis. But on top of that, there was an even bigger problem hanging over their heads. He got even angrier and said the Grand Duke was onto his father's scheme. Ivnis's cocky attitude made it clear she knew about it too. Bilos was sure the Grand Duke was the one who spilled the beans to her. Still, he couldn't figure out why he'd suddenly decide to tell her all this. His guess was the Duke wanted to get her on the side of someone she didn't get along with. He probably figured he could get something out of that spoiled imperial princess. Bilos sneered, saying he'd finally get rid of his sister this time. Sir Garen replied that the Emperor ordered him to deal with the Empress's situation. Bilos glared daggers at him, asking if he was talking back. Gyron accepted his fate, bowed, and begged for forgiveness. He asked Bilos how he planned to get rid of the princess. He learned that he was going to set fire to the house where Eve would be sleeping. The second prince figured the Duke wouldn't care if she lived or died. He waved his hand and ordered them not to interfere, saying he'd handle it himself. Billos couldn't help but remember kissing her hand and saying they'd meet again soon. He smirked wickedly, saying he didn't think he'd be able to keep that promise. Meanwhile, Ivnis was counting down the days to the treacherous festival. She was still mulling over the Duke's words, the ones that showed he cared. Back then, he used to say a lot of things that you could mistake for caring. She was so unused to hearing people worry about her, it was hard to believe. Being an orphan, she'd never heard words of concern before. She figured Terrence's worry probably had something to do with her abilities. The girl was bracing herself for the day he'd fall for Sorel. Even though they'd become friends during this time, the fact they were using each other hadn't changed. She decided she shouldn't let her emotions get involved or rely on anyone else. The next day, the girl finally found out her dress was almost ready. Diana showed her the wedding gown and said it was really taking shape. Ivnis was blown away that the dress had practically sprung to life from that sketch. Diana promised she'd add a couple more touches after he gives it the thumbs up. Seeing the wedding dress, Eve realized the wedding was only 2 weeks away. Diana gave the girl a surprised look when she thanked her. She was grateful for all the trouble Diana went through to make the dress. The princess smiled gently and promised she'd never forget it. Diana immediately blushed and told her not to say things like that. She looked away and said they'd be family real soon. Eve said she'd like to stay friends, secretly hoping she could find a cure. She'd been trying to get even the smallest hint the whole time, but couldn't. Diana brought some cookies into the room, and then they started having tea. Eve tried to spend as much time together as possible, hoping for a vision. They plopped down on the couch, ready to dig into some cookies. The princess was surprised, saying she'd never seen this kind of cookie before. She picked up a piece and realized it was a festival cookie. In the next instant, both girls agreed how incredibly delicious it was. The princess wondered if she should get Sorel a gift. Diana noticed her hesitation and said the festival starts in 2 days. The girl was super hyped and couldn't wait for it to get here. The princess agreed, not mentioning it might be her last. They started talking about making flower lanterns with the people they cared about. Eve doubted Terrence would even have time to make it. After a short pause, Diana offered to build that lantern with him. They went silent when they heard the Grand Chamberlain of the Imperial Palace had arrived. The man entered the room and apologized for the unexpected visit. He said he came to deliver a message from the Crown Prince. He ordered that the Imperial Knights brought to the temple be brought to the Imperial Palace. The princess asked why he had given such an order. Turns out, Billos showed up at the palace and said he didn't have enough knights. At that moment, the princess realized the grim prophecy was starting to come true.